Hello, welcome everybody to the Shelburne Planning Commission on August, wait, we're in September 26th. Am I? Oh, those are the minutes from the 22nd meeting. Gotcha. All right, first item is call it to order. First item is the approval of the agenda. We have a motion to approve.
I shall move to approve the agenda.
All right, moved by Neil.
Second?
Second by Stephen. Any discussion? Pretty straightforward tonight. All right, all in favor of the agenda as stands? Aye. Neil?
Aye.
Next is approval of the minutes from August 22nd. Motion to approve those.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Moved by Megan, seconded by
So moved.
Kate. All right, any discussion?
I wasn't there for that one, so I don't, if it doesn't need me to vote in favor of it, I would abstain.
Sure. Do we, now that I'm looking at that, we have what? Yeah, the rest of us are quorum. I just had one, mostly just to say out loud to make sure I'm following. On page 3, the first bullet says it was clarified under form-based code that the development potential on a lot is only reduced by the square footage of the existing building.
The land required by the existing building.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, so can we add that? So we'll add the land. Wait, reduced by the square footage.
Produced by the square footage by the land required by the existing building. But the square footage of the land
That's
required.
still-
It's the amount of land that goes with that. So, you know, it's basically saying that if there's an existing building, you treat that building as though it was a form-based zoning building, and then you take the amount of land that that building type requires, and you say, that's how much goes to that building, and then the rest is left over for other things.
That I follow. So if we add square footage of the land occupied by the existing building, does that?
Well, it's not the build, I mean, if that may say to some that it's the building footprint, or be the building, the land is occupied by the building, it's the land occupied by the building and the amount that goes with it.
I may be really thick tonight. That's not. Is everybody else? Am I the only one?
It's a little bit, I don't think it's vague, but it's complicated, I guess.
Yeah, and maybe it's the context of that discussion that I don't have in my head at the moment. I just read that and it didn't, I wasn't following how that made sense. So I'm curious how we can clarify this specific sentence.
So perhaps if you said something like the square footage, well, actually, the area, maybe,
I'm not comfortable with the word reduced, if we really get into it, I would say, the remaining development potential in the lot is calculated by the square footage of the remaining, land available or something like that. You know what I mean? Something in that.
Because, it seems kind of clear to me.
I get it, I would understand what you meant.
Yeah,
As is?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay with that then. All right. Okay, fair enough. Any other points? I had nothing else. All right, if no other comments, all in favor of the minutes as written? Aye.
I'll abstain.
All right, good. Okay, any disclosures this evening around any conflicts of interest? Seeing none. Open to the public. for anything that's not on tonight's agenda? Any discussion? Nope. All right, on to zoning matters. So we're into section 2208 of the form-based zoning on definitions. And I think the best way to go through this is not to go through each definition, but I don't know if we do section by section or just page by page, if anybody has a definition they'd like to address. I do have notes.
Yeah, I had a couple on this first page.
You want to toss out your first one?
Let's see, building envelope, the top of the middle column. The building envelope dictates the specific set of building envelope standards that apply to all properties. Seems like a lot of use of the words building envelope. And I was wondering if that whole first sentence was necessary, if we couldn't just say, building envelope standards include allowable uses, siting locations, height consisting of height, et cetera, something like that. Which is to say, does that second sentence actually get us to where we need to be? Building envelope dictates the specific building envelope standard. I mean, what are building envelope standards? Building envelope standards are the use, the siting, the height, and the element requirements.
Yeah, I could see benefit in saying that each building type has a building envelope or has envelope standards just to give more weight to the second sentence. I don't know that on itself would do it.
I don't think you can completely take out the first sentence because it's a definition of building envelope, and if you just say building envelope standards, then you're defining the standards, not the envelope.
So you could say the specific set of, well, you don't have to repeat building envelope necessarily.
Well, we're saying what the building envelope does, or what it means in interpreting things, but we're not saying what the building envelope actually means as a definition.
Well, it's defined operationally. So that's how some definitions work, but
Why
you
don't
would
you just
prefer, sorry?
flip the sentences? You
What's
could
that?
just flip the sentences, would that help?
Well, I think Megan's right, that the second sentence is about the standards. It's one way that the building envelopes are used,
I
but I
see.
think what people are looking
Right.
for is something that says the building envelope is the area within a lot that has certain features. That's the languages I think you would like to craft. And I was looking through another reference to see if it had a definition of building envelope, and unfortunately, it doesn't have one, but doesn't mean that I won't find one in a minute.
You could also break off building envelope standards as a separate definition if we wanted to clarify it, if that helped a little.
I also appreciate the suggestion to delete just the second building envelope from that first sentence, which is to say the building envelope dictates a specific set of standards that apply to all properties.
And then list the
Building envelope
standards.
standards consist of, I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'd still like to say, to have, as Dean says, a sentence before this that says, the building envelope is blah, blah, blah.
It's a defined area on a lot.
Governed
then-
by those standards.
Well, that's what the next sentence would do.
Right, right.
Defined area on the lot wherein you can place a building.
Would you want to say how the area is defined? Maybe getting to be a really long definition, but it's an area set. I guess I don't know exactly how building envelope's set, so
Yeah,
so like 20% bigger than the building itself or whatever the building envelope is.
Sometimes when they drafted this, they had what amounted to definitions in a couple of places. I'm just going to word search.
In form-based code, you can build outside the envelope, though, can't you?
Yes, it's only those things, the standards that are, right, there are a set of standards that apply to the areas within the building envelope. So that's,
But you can build outside the building.
right.
That's a more complicating point, there, Brian.
When you read through it, it is, because you can build a deck outside the building envelope.
and porches and awnings and,
I'm not, I don't have it all memorized, but
But,
when
yeah,
I'm
there
trying to
was-
lay it out, you
Can-
can build the deck outside the building envelope in the back.
Can we say it's a constraint wherein you can build interior space or occupiable space?
Am I wrong on that, Dean? or-
No, and that's why to address this desire to have this opening sentence that says it's an area on a lot. But I don't think you can say without thinking about it and double checking how much further that you would go in this definition to get all of the things right, so that you wouldn't just define it as in terms of the places where there's a structure, because certain parts of a building can actually go outside, either because they're specifically identified in the standards for that type of structure or for that type of feature, or it may be something that you would be doing as a result of a waiver. So ultimately, it comes down to, it's an area on a lot, and there are certain standards that apply to it. And then you have the standards that dictate use, siting, height, and element requirements.
The thing though is that for each building type, there isn't a section that says building envelope or anything like that. So I was just curious how, I was trying to refresh myself how it's being used in the document outside of just
And that's
building
what I
type
was
definition.
doing the
yeah.
word search to see
Okay.
where,
Can we come up with just a part of that definition that just applies to all, where the building envelope is, I mean, somewhere, I think it should say where you put the building, or where you put interior space on the building, within which you can build interior occupiable space.
Does that second sentence sort of get at that? Consists of use, siting, height, and element requirements?
so the phrase building envelope, that specific phrase I'm finding in connection with the sustainable design, the energy, that's one place it's highlighted here. But as you're saying, it's not, unless this is not word searching the building types. There may be in a graphic.
Yeah, that, I'm not seeing
That
that
I'm
word
not
under
gonna
any
find
of the building types. Yeah, my comment next to that was an assumption that each type has an envelope when I was just going through the definitions, but then now seeing that that isn't a term that's used there.
Yeah, I mean, the building envelope is normally, in architectural lingo, it's the enclosure of the heated space, or the conditioned space. And I don't think form-based code allows, stuff that's conditioned space to be outside of a building envelope. I think we can,
No, but there is, because I think, Brian, to your point, there are certain things, I could have sworn I had read that there were things that can exceed, I mentally associated it with building envelope, but if you're not turning it up, then I'm clearly thinking of something else.
well, porch or deck is not part of the conditioned space.
Oh, keyword being conditioned,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yes, so,
Those
I
are just the
mean,
interior spaces.
But the garage would have to remain inside the building.
Are those, I don't know, are those allowed to be outside of the building envelope?
And not from what I've read. The things that I read were just, I thought it was just the rear deck could encroach out onto the rear setback. That's what jumps into my mind.
Yeah.
yeah, and so one of the things that I think is happening is that Brian and I are both inferring what the building envelope is from the standards for the building types. Because the phrase building envelope isn't used except in connection with, for energy purposes. Now, I think that what this definition is intended to do is to be defining an area that people will sometimes use in conventional zoning as the area that meets the setback. So you've got parcel boundaries, and then you've got you've got setbacks, and then once you've gotten past the setbacks, you have an area that is your building envelope.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying it as, but that phrase isn't actually used in the text. So maybe you don't need to include that definition.
That's a good point.
That's where my mind was going.
Right.
I'm just, when you mention the standard regs, I wasn't sure if this is a consistent term that's used that should have a definition.
Yeah, well, one of the things that these guys, the consultants, did was to primarily use one of the model codes, but there were things that they took from other places. And I just was looking at the smart code, and it, in version 9.2, doesn't have that term defined. Now, it maybe would, can give me a second more, because again, sometimes it lists the term as defined, and then other times it basically does it in the text. So,
When you submit a plan to the DRB, normally you include a building envelope.
Yeah.
When you do it with when I did it with the form-based code, you had to edit yourself because the drawing got too complex when you put all of the setbacks in there, and it just made the drawing hard to read. So you went with a basic envelope, the build-to zone. You didn't include the 5-foot setback for parking, from side yard. I left a lot of things off, and even in the Ravi's conditions to move forward, he said any of the permits that we submit for a building would have to meet all of those other setback requirements that are written into the code. But to put them on a plan, it gets really muddled.
so the phrase building envelope isn't used in this document, which is the sort of document that a lot of the things in Shelburne's form-based zoning came from. So I'm
So we
not
get
seeing
this-
the need for it.
Yeah.
I didn't bring it up with the intention of deleting it, but
There you go. Hey,
No worries. Well, we can certainly remove that. What else do you want to get rid of?
building
There you
lot.
while you're there.
Building lot.
All right.
A building lot is a parcel of land either vacant or occupied intended has a unit for the purpose of transfer of ownership or possession or for development. A unit intended has a unit for the purpose of What's a unit? What does that mean?
It's something that wouldn't be divided. Is how I think of it. I mean, just as a practical matter, it would be the smallest level.
When I think of a unit, I think of an apartment. That's what comes to mind.
Like a dwelling unit.
And so then I went looking for a definition for a unit, and I couldn't find one. And so then I was left like, what does this mean?
Did you say unit of land?
Is that
But then what is that?
an acre? I don't know.
Well, it's a.
And I feel stronger about the building envelope than I do about this. So I'm happy that you guys could tell me. It's clear to everybody that that just means a piece of land, Neil, and I'll stand down rapidly.
No, I was just wondering if the intention aspect of it needs to be defined. Just say it's a parcel of land, either vacant or occupied, and that's what a building lot is. That's how we use it. It's referring to the lot. It's the parcel of land that's in question.
So this definition is saying that it's a parcel of land that's intended to be sold as a piece, is how I read it, that the unit is like, you're buying one unit of something, and the unit is this lot.
So does that mean
And
it has a deed to it? Like, is that?
That I don't, something that someone is able to sell?
You're wondering if it has a deed, or would there?
Is that what it means?
Or if that's a
you
way
have
that it
if
can
you
be
have a
measured.
unit, then it must have a deed.
Maybe you could add like a contiguous unit? That's,
If, yeah, I mean, it may be, yes, if.
if it's going
Yeah,
to
I
be
think-
transferred, it has
Yeah,
to have
the
a
short answer is, that I think it would be a deed. I mean, but, yeah, I mean, if that helps,
Well, instead of saying intended as a unit for the purpose of, could we just say it's either vacant or occupied for the purpose of? Like intended as a unit is the complicating factor, I
Yeah.
think, in there.
That's right.
So if we just removed intended as a unit,
Just remove as a unit, intended for the purpose
Or-
of transfer of ownership.
Yeah.
Well, or possession, because.
I mean, it's not even it's that it's intended for. It's just that's what it is, I think. To me.
You could say which can be transferred. That the grammar doesn't work with that, but just saying it's something, it's a piece of land, occupied or not, that can be
That can be.
can have ownership transferred or can be developed on. Again, the grammar's not right there, but
Right.
that,
Yeah, no,
that would clarify it
That resonates.
for you. Okay. So how do we say that?
I say that can be.
Or
So that is, I mean, the term building lot is coming up in,
Lots of places.
there are several places, so it's used.
well, that
And it's
actually is
funny
the
'cause
same
it's-
definition right there.
Yeah. Like I said, in some instances, it was found in both places.
I mean, if anything, you could just say it's a unit of land. It just sounds repetitive.
It-
Unless we could get the grammar working better.
Yeah.
Because I like the,
I can't quite.
yeah, I'm not getting there either.
Vacant or occupied.
I mean, even if it's like referenced for the purpose of transfer of ownership or logged or
Yeah.
noted or something. Defined for the purpose?
One of the things that may be helpful is the traditional zoning regs have a definition of lot. So you can see, and one of the things that it may be there for is to make clear what building lot means in the form-based zoning as compared to in the traditional. So, lot in the conventional zoning, parcel of land other than a pre-existing small lot, blah, blah, blah. So this is how it is defined in the conventional zoning. So the idea is that it's something that's big enough to be transferred. You know, it meets the requirements of the regs. You wouldn't consider, you know, the kitchen in your house a unit or a lot. It would be a part of your building, but
Then, I mean, could we borrow that and say for the, where is it? No, I just lost it.
It seems like consistency would be beneficial.
well, but the approaches are a little bit different, which is, you know, some cases there were definitions in the traditional regs that the understanding was, hey, that's the definition that will work with form-based zoning. As far as building lot, I'm not remembering the specifics, but at the time, there must have been a decision made that it warranted to have its own definition that was different from this one. Because if we took this definition into the form-based zoning, find other spaces. Yeah, because it's required. The open space requirements in the form-based zoning can be met off the lot. So I'm not sure that there wouldn't be a conflict. Yeah.
Or as a,
What- oh,
go ahead.
I just had a reworking of the language
Sure.
for this existing one. You could say, A building lot is a parcel of land, either vacant or occupied, which is eligible for a transfer of ownership or possession or for development. I don't know if eligible is quite the right word, if that has a legal something to it, but
Yeah, similar to
that's
it.
the,
In that same line, I was thinking that meets the requirements for.
I
just
think that
to-
would be better.
To bring it,
Sounds good to me, either of
is
those.
that?
I think meets the requirements is a
So
better,
instead of, so
formulation.
remove as a unit and add that meets the requirements for?
I like
Or-
that. Thank you, Jason and Megan.
Can someone just give that to me again? Sorry.
So remove as a unit and replace it with that meets the requirements. So a building lot that is a building lot is a parcel of land either vacant or occupied. Get rid of intended to. That meets the requirements for the purpose of transfer of ownership, possession, or development. Is that tripping you up?
Well, I'm pondering it
accurate.
for a second. So that meets the requirements, so,
So I
which
misspoke.
requirements would be establishing the minimum, I mean, it may work, I'm just trying to think it through. That meets the requirements for the purposes of transfers, meets the purposes
I
of
mean-
transfer of ownership, possession, and for development. So, yeah, if it meets the requirements for development, it's going to be meeting the building type standards and so on. So, yeah, I mean, if this grammar or style is acceptable, then I would say go for it.
as long as we're not changing the meaning through that.
Right.
Right. I mean, this is more that if this raises a question or debate around something, there's a definition, that's it. The next question would be, what are the requirements? And then you could get into the
Yeah.
minutia of,
Right. So when we're making this proposal, we do also want to go back to that other place.
Right.
Can I ask us to go back to the previous definition that we just nixed? Or the building
Just crossed it
envelope?
off, we can't go back.
Sorry.
Trying to propose a new definition, Steve?
Yeah, I think I've got one. I think it's important, just so that people that don't know what a building envelope is in general, I mean, all of our diagrams and stuff show a dotted line that's a different color from everything outside of the dotted line. So we all refer to that as a building envelope, whether there are exceptions or other things that can go outside of that. That's part of why we have a code. So we can, I think, make a mention of that in the definition. So I'd propose that the building envelope is a portion of a building lot, since we're now defining building lot again, defined by setbacks or other restrictions or exemptions in these standards, within which a building can be located. And then further on with what we have here, just take out that first, the building envelope, and say, replace it with it. It dictates a specific set of building envelope standards that apply to all properties, and so on, and keep the next line the same. So I'll read that again. A portion of a building lot defined by setbacks or other restrictions or exemptions in these standards, within which a building can be located. Does that make sense?
yeah, I think, no problem with the definition. It would be cool if we reference that this area is what we mean by the building envelope. But I think that opens up a bigger can of worms in terms of editing all of those pictures.
The brown area.
Represented by the brown area on the building types.
Stephen, I got as far as a portion of a building lot defined by setbacks or other restrictions, then there was something within which a building can be located. What's the part that I missed?
Or that part was, or exemptions
Or exemptions?
in these standards. Or we don't have to say in these standards. Or exemptions within which a building can be located.
So does the group want to go back to retaining?
It's helpful because, to your point, the brown area, that is what we refer to as a building envelope. I have no problem keeping it that way. It's just always finding that balance of, if we make one thing, do we need to make the next change, and where do you just draw the line so we don't get sucked into never getting anything done?
Should the building type pages have that labeled as the building envelope?
My follow-up to that is, how involved is that?
Well, it wouldn't be necessarily pretty, but it could be done, it could be functionally added, yeah.
I mean, would it be if it's just being used in this document, would it be reasonable to say well, no.
I mean, it could be at the beginning of the, if you wanted to improvise a solution at the beginning or in a sentence ahead of the building type standards, but then again, no one would really pay attention to it there.
Yeah, if at the end of the day, it's mostly to have a definition.
But then the phrase itself isn't used, except with energy.
I mean, that's my only question about it. It's just that it's not used.
Well, that was my main reason for saying we don't need it if it's not used within the document. But if it's clarifying that area for, I mean, I didn't actually go through and do a word count of every time any of these definitions is used,
Yeah, I
so
certainly
we might have
didn't.
other words that aren't referenced or,
But if it's
but
part
they're
of
helpful.
the lingo of the field, of the profession, then
Right.
that we ought to be clear about, if somebody comes in and is talking about building envelopes, this is what it would mean. I don't know, maybe it's,
And
I
that's
mean,
what
it seems like
reasonable
this
to
is
have
one
it
of the
here.
main, like the building envelope, whether it's called that in other places or not, that's what a big part of this form-based code is all about, the building envelope. And, it seems like we ought to at least have a definition of it in there, because we are going to be talking about that, and it's probably maybe more important to define that than a bicycle lane or, an attic story or something like that, because it's a major part of what this code is all about.
Yeah,
I have a very basic question, because at one point you were saying it's the interior conditioned spaces,
Yeah.
which is different from this definition.
It is.
So in energy, you're talking about the interior spaces, the
Right.
building envelope versus this building envelope.
Yeah.
That's
But
how I
Brian
think
points
of
out
building.
rightly
So-
that from a site planning standpoint, building envelope means a different thing.
Okay.
It's,
But the one place the phrase is used is in that energy way, and so maybe if you are going to go in this
That
direction,
would create
change
confusion.
that to something else, so that it's not confusing.
well, but
right,
that,
you could call that
term,
thermal envelope in that case.
Then let's just make sure we change building envelope to thermal envelope.
I would agree with
That would-
that, the thermal envelope. Yeah, that works.
does that make sense within the context of that
I
other usage?
think so.
Well, it sounds like the only structures that can be located outside of the building envelope, if I'm understanding it correctly, are things that are not part of the thermal envelope, right? Is that,
No, that,
I wouldn't want to say I'm absolutely sure, but yeah, I think maybe that porches and
Garage might, maybe.
yeah.
Right, then you have to go into, like Brian was saying, whether the garage is heated or unheated. If it's not heated, is that considered to be outside of that envelope? And I don't think we want to go there and like pick apart what, all the things that are,
Right.
so that's where I think we say defined by setbacks or other restrictions or exemptions, so that, we have to look in the code to see what exemptions there are to going outside of a building envelope.
okay.
But at least there's a building envelope.
my intention is not to rabbit hole this, but if we're talking about building envelope is represented by that brown area, you couldn't just put a building on that entire brown area.
But you can put, it's usually within which you can put a building. You can't fill the whole building envelope, but you have to locate it within that. You
Yeah.
can't,
Lot coverage governs how much of that brown area you can fill with a building.
Right, I think I just want to make that distinction because I think how are you referring to the thermal envelope in that? I mean, the thermal envelope is the actual building.
The heated,
It's
the
the-
conditioned
The heated,
space.
yeah.
Right, the conditioned space. And that's how that is being used, right?
I'm just gonna make it bigger.
No,
Kate, I think you want to be careful using the word structure.
Mm.
Because the town defines a lot of things as structures. that you
Yeah.
wouldn't think. Like light poles, that's why the DRB, or the HPDRC has governance over it, it's because they term a light pole as structure. Is that correct?
No, because it was a modification to a site plan, and so before you get to the DRB for a site plan, in the district, it has to be reviewed.
I thought the Ravi told me that since it was a light pole, they had to go to the HPDRC because they
Well,
considered it a structure.
Well, it is a structure, but it's a modification to the site
Oh,
plan.
well, they call a lot of things a structure that you wouldn't think would be a structure.
That's a conversation for another day.
We can just call it a building, like I'm
Driveways.
proposing, and then that covers porches, garages, interior space, anything that's considered a building.
Yeah, I think your definition is fine. To me, it's more how it's used there, and I would just take out building envelope altogether.
And energy people do refer to that as a thermal envelope. I mean, that is common terminology in that profession, speaking as an energy efficiency professional.
But nixing it wouldn't harm that paragraph.
Right. I don't
And that's
think
the
it
only
would.
place it's used.
You're right.
Right.
You're right.
So are you
Yeah.
comfortable with having in the marked up version that those two words would be deleted?
That would be my proposal.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I actually think it makes it stronger.
If you take out building envelope and substitute thermal envelope for it, or
I think
I just think that
nothing.
confuses it.
I think actually by taking out the building envelope, it makes that stronger. Because there's other things that you can do to improve the energy efficiency of a building, right? Which is to say that you can improve the heating system or the cooling system. You can do other things.
What was
but
that?
that's still
Page 40?
a building envelope, or a thermal envelope efficiency if you change the heating system. Because you're not going to be heating a porch or something like that. You are only heating a thermal envelope enclosed space.
I just don't know if it's necessary to have anything there, that you get to the same point either way. I can't, to improve.
Yeah, I was trying to get to that same page here. I know
Sorry, where do you want to go?
well, I know that's page 48, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the
Oh,
actual page.
it's page
number.
46 in the document.
46.
It's under other sustainable building design techniques.
See, as I go down the list of bullets underneath there, it's like, well, okay, there's also wind and roof-mounted solar energy generation, ground source heat exchangers.
We're not necessarily talking about the thermal.
I mean, none of
envelope.
that stuff has to do with Energy Star rated appliances, dual flush and waterless toilets. I mean, none of that's
You
about.
had that conversation about that. There was that conversation about the toilets, which,
There was.
so what had been discussed before, those things in the red are what had been the consensus.
Right. Waterless toilets got the nicks.
Yeah, I'd say,
And that's all fine. No,
Right.
I'm okay.
Yeah, I
I'm
wasn't
okay with
looking to
what's there.
digress.
But my point is that none of those things have to do
with
with that little laundry list that I just read up. That doesn't have to do with the thermal envelope, which is really sort of the insulation and air sealing and
It's all
wind
the
and
reason to
that
strike it.
So
the
just
reason to strike
remove
that
the
word
words
is
building
to-
envelope?
Yes.
That
that's-
makes
that's what
sense
I'm
to me.
agreeing- That's what I'm agreeing with,
Yeah.
All right.
So understood that building envelope will be stricken from page 46, and that working definition that was put together would be used in the definition section.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Correct. That.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It is.
Welcome back, building envelope. Making progress. All right. 20 minutes, 2 definitions. We're crushing it. Not to go in reverse, but the definition of alley the number 3. It's specifying that it's to the rear of lots. And I was wondering if that is a specific thing. Could you not have an alley to the side of a building? Is that something that could trip up a process at some point?
Could it trip up a process? Maybe, but the way that I think that it's used with the building types, it's intended to be in the rear.
Well, I grew up in section of Washington where there are side alleys. That's how you get in.
That's what I was thinking.
It's like a T block. Imagine a block, and there's a T. And so for all of the houses to have alley behind them, that's what you have. I mean, I could make an image that was helpful. But so that means of necessity that at least 2 residences have the alley as a side yard, in their side yard, well, along their side yard.
Unless it comes out at the end. If it came out at the end of a block.
That's one way to do it, but very often it doesn't do that. It comes out within the block itself, like a T, if that makes sense. Happy to make an illustration if that would be helpful.
So,
Or I was even just thinking if you had well, yeah, there's a bunch of different ways that could go. To try to simplify it, is there a need to define rear of lots? Or to have that in the definition? I'm just wondering if we need to even specify to the rear of lots.
Yeah.
But then I see the rabbit hole, because now I'm starting to look at street types and because of scenarios that we've gone through, I just always leap to how the system can be gamed and what are the challenges we're going to get, and that starts getting mind-blowing pretty quick.
I had another question on this, which is just paved from building face to building face. What is?
It's fully paved. There's no yard. It's just for driving.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so it would really be if you, maybe not a great example, but if you took the form-based building in South Burlington across the street from McDonald's at that intersection.
Yeah.
It's got the Muskoma and all
Yep.
of it. If you envisioned that type of building going all the way down Route 7, you
Yeah.
could have in between them, perpendicular to Route 7, an alley going between 2 buildings. Could be 2 buildings on a lot, could be 2 different lots.
And it's from one paved from one building
And it
to
would
the
be,
next.
right, it would just simply be an asphalt alley between those 2 buildings.
Understood. Thank you.
And
Okay.
that's kind of what I was picturing, and so when I saw to the rear of lots, I understand that.
That's what I was thinking, like Church Street.
Right.
Alleys like where Red Square is.
Right, exactly, yeah. And that would not be to the rear of that lot.
Correct.
And I can't necessarily speak for how form-based will be implemented and what types of building types would be used, but it just struck me as odd that we would force it to the rear, because I can imagine a developer coming to us and saying, well, we want to put an alley here, but the definition says that it has to be to the rear, and we can't do what we want to do, so we have to change it then. But I don't know if changing it now potentially complicates something for another reason.
so I don't know that it's gonna set off problems if you were to strike located to the rear of lots, which is what I think you are saying. And it would just be a vehicular way, providing access to service areas, et cetera.
Because we already define what it is between building face to building face. And technically, if you're talking building face to face, that would be a side, to me, I think.
That means that there won't be alleys in residential areas at all, if we're saying paved from building face to building face. And I know there aren't really alleys in residential areas here now, but by setting that, because I don't know Kate's drawing, like, I grew up in Minnesota, we had alleys, and they weren't paved up to the house. You know, if you have it in a
Right.
residential area, you have a backyard, an alley, a backyard, a house.
Well, to me,
Which is
alleys-
maybe, I mean, we don't have those here,
A
but.
house, a yard, a garage, an alley, a garage, a yard, and then a house. That's the
That's
way
the section,
Yeah.
I
yeah.
see alleys.
But we,
And that's why they're paved right up to the edge of them.
So do understand that it should, not shall. So it's not a mandate.
Okay.
It's an indication.
It's a good call out. Well, my proposal would just be to get rid of located to the rear of lots, and then that keeps it flexible. Is that just getting rid of located to the rear of lots?
Yeah, and then the drainage part is actually what interests me, because actually in Washington, in the last couple of years, they've kind of followed the example of Chicago in utilizing alleys as a really great opportunity to capture and sequester stormwater. So they've made them permeable, with permeable paving and things like that. So maybe that's something to get to at another time, but this is kind of pretty old school, the way that they're talking about
Yeah.
having the drainage.
And again, it's should, that's. But is there consensus? Located to the rear of lots, that's gone. So I can make a note that that would be edited out.
Sure,
I'm
yeah.
good with that.
We're good?
Yep.
Okay.
And Kate, to get to your point, would you want to add some reference to permeable pavers or something like that?
Let's see.
Permeable surfaces should be considered.
Yes, there we go. Permeable surfaces should be considered. They're perfect.
Just adding that to the end of it?
Yeah, thank
But
you.
that's part of a code, that's not, this is a definition that we're talking about.
I mean, this is one of those
Yeah.
wonky definitions that gets into standard areas,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's, but is there a consensus then to include that phrase, that should be considered the permeable?
I mean, is the drainage part even really necessary in there, or? It seems awfully urban for Shelburne, doesn't it, that standard?
It does, but a lot of the building types that could be used are very urban in the corridor.
Yeah, I mean,
It doesn't make sense for residential necessarily, like if you have a neighborhood.
I hear your comment about it, somebody made a comment about it being more prescriptive than sort of definitional or more regulatory. And yeah, that resonates. That feels like a strange place to be putting that stuff.
Yeah.
It does, but at the same time, if there's an issue that comes up about alleys and somebody's looking up a definition and it's, oh, okay, there's intent there. Like there's what was in their heads when they were putting this together. Similar to the town plan when we've had contentious issues and we can look at what's in the plan when we're debating a reg and say, well, you can tell what the spirit is here, like what the intention is, and that can color the rest of the conversation.
Well, I think when they have this description, maybe it's just, maybe it shouldn't say should there. Maybe, I mean, it helps to clarify what that means, why it's different from a driveway or an access road. So when I read that second sentence, I say, oh, okay, now I get it. It's like, it's different from an access road. So maybe we should say, rear examples are sometimes, paved from building face to building face with the drainage by inverted crown or permeable pavers at the center or roll curves at the edges. Or we could just say, for example, rear alleys,
Well, I'd argue that we
Are
don't
often
need rear
blah,
either.
blah, blah. To just help clarify how that's different, rather than say what it should be.
Yeah. I could see that, removing the word rear. So alleys should be, also,
I was just saying, for example, an alley would be paved, blah, blah, blah. Or, for example, an alley might be paved from building face to building face, blah, blah, blah.
You could say alleys frequently are paved.
Yeah.
Do we need the second sentence?
Well, it helps to describe it to me.
Okay.
If everybody can do without it.
Well, it provides sort of an image of what we're moving towards. I mean, this is the tricky part of this whole, for me, this whole code is, you have this very suburban existing conditions, and, we want to try and enable them to morph into something else. But the pathway, it's all about the pathway to getting there, and so I think providing an image of where we ultimately want to go is helpful, but then providing a more flexibility about, the steps for getting there, because it's just, otherwise it's, the building face to building face, most people have, in a residential setting in Shelburne, have their garages are front loading, from the street right now, so, I mean, that's aesthetically my preference, but, that's not what we have. So,
Would it make, I appreciate what you're saying, Stephen, with, for example, but these aren't really examples of what it's in before, so would it make more sense to say further?
Like
Because-
further alleys should be,
Or frequently,
or are frequent.
or
But-
sometimes.
Well, are they? In
So it's
whose-
just further alleys may be paved.
Yeah, I mean, that permissive is kind of close to what should is, which is that you're encouraged, but,
In practical terms, it's
You're
that's the
not-
same
yeah,
impact.
you're not required to do it.
so alleys may be paved from building to building or something like that? I think that's kind of not a bad way to strike a balance.
Yeah. I agree.
So change should to may.
Yeah.
And take off
And get
rear,
rid of
Take out rear.
if we took it off from the other
Yeah.
sentence.
I'm just gonna roll with impartial on that.
Wait, did I hear it right? Maybe? No?
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
If maybe is what the strong feelings are for, that's good. And then, again, not to complicate it, but when I think building face, I think the front of the building. And I believe the way that this is, it's just basically a side of a building. Is that accurate, or are we really distorting this at this point?
And that's why I brought up that question at the beginning, but then having this conversation, I was like, oh, I understand now, so.
Yeah, I don't want
I'm
to.
less concerned about it now than I was at the beginning of the conversation.
Okay. So alleys may be paved from building face to building face, and then, how did you want to word the permeable material, or?
With drainage by inverted crown at the center, permeable paving, or roll curbs at the edges.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that provides guidance and flexibility at the same time, which is good.
Good. We're on a good 10 minutes per word tack. All right.
I want to go back to number one, A-frame sign.
Awesome. Okay.
Getting punchy on the planning commission.
Right? It's not even 10 o'clock yet. All right. Let's see. What's the next one?
Do you want to talk about civic space?
I got a note on that. What do you,
I had a question about the last sentence in that definition. Good design is essential to creating functional and attractive civic space. I was wondering if that sentence was necessary, or how we define good design.
I wouldn't say it's something that I'd argue with, but I agree from a definition standpoint, it's very subjective.
I found the sentence to be kind of patronizing, kind of like, good design, you'll use good design. We will know good design when we see it.
I feel like there are a few other places in the code where there are references like that. I feel like in the signage, there were things like well-designed signs, or I can't think of what it was exactly, but that type of language is used elsewhere.
I also think of these as not necessarily critical to the definition, but more in terms of conveying the spirit So that if, I don't know, let's say that there was a horrendous civic space design or something, this would be one more thing to say, well, what do we think? Is this good design? Like, it all
Just-
complicates stuff.
Just to put a little context, the zoning regs in the past have had a density bonus for exceptional design.
Stop.
So the phrase exceptional design has been part of Shelburne zoning regs before.
That's fine.
Can we just upgrade to
So
stupendous?
I
and
trumped
come-
your good with exceptional.
Why isn't exceptional design essential to creating functional, attractive civic space? It's just good. Are we really going to settle for that?
Welcome to adequacy.
It's fine. It's fine. Let's move on.
In that same one, though, the couple of sentences before, it says they establish a sense of place, and when used to host events such as markets and festivals, draw people and business downtown. And I don't know that downtown is accurate necessarily. I mean, but again, not something to get nitpicky about. I
You wanna
imagine
change
this
it
was,
to the space.
or just get rid of,
Just draw people in business.
yeah, draw
period.
people in business, to, yeah.
Sure.
Get rid of downtown.
Yeah, this does
Or
sound
say
kind of
to the
cut and
area,
pasted
or-
from somewhere else.
Right.
But downtown's gone.
Downtown
As-
is gone.
as
To the
far as-
area, maybe, yeah.
Sorry.
Draw people in business to the area.
To, yeah,
Was there a resolution to the good design is essential sentence? Is it staying? Is it going?
I say let's keep it.
The architect says, let's keep good design.
As opposed to exceptional design, which is
Too heavy.
more than you need for creating functional space. If we're just talking functional, good is fine.
all right, I think we're almost under 5 minutes for this one. Why don't we just, unless you're gonna
No, we're leaving.
lose
It's
sleep.
good.
All
It's
right.
good.
Okay.
I'm all about good design.
Bastard.
And let's see. Under construction sign, saying it may include the construction company's name, addresses, and/or telephone number. And my initial thought was, are these examples or rules? Like-
Examples? I mean, it's
mean-
a permissive.
I know it's, right. Well, yes. Okay.
It's, it,
Like, you may have 3 M&Ms versus you may have M&Ms. Those are very different. Like, these are specific things saying that you may have on your sign
yeah.
versus, as an example, is how I took it, but.
Yeah, it's probably, I mean, I would encourage you to get rid of it because there's this trend in the law that the courts don't like anything that makes a reference to the content or the message. And so this is getting at the message. So,
Well, I'd like to say that we should keep the message, unless we're going to take construction sign out entirely, but a temporary sign directly connected with a construction project, that could be, like mattresses for sale in this building when it's done. But I would like to change construction company to project teams' names, addresses, or telephone number, because often it's the owner, the construction company, the architect, the engineers, and I think that's considered a project team rather than just a construction company. That's usually what's on a construction sign. It's the whole project team.
Yeah.
I'd be in favor of
Funders,
replacing
yep.
construction
Yep.
companies with project. But it definitely strikes me as rules, not examples. And that may be okay. There's a lot of hair splitting going on these days, and it's just sort of really changing how thinking happens. Okay. Design speed, mostly just for thought. To say the velocity at which a thoroughfare tends to be driven without the constraints of signage or enforcement. The without the constraints of signage or enforcement seems incredibly subjective to me.
It is, but that's pretty much the way it's defined.
Okay.
That's the way the Agency of Transportation sees design speed.
I had a good friend who was a traffic engineer, and he told me that once. And I was just like, really? That's how they figure it out? It's like, yeah, we go measure how fast people are going, and we say speed limit should be 35. I'm like, really? That's how they do it.
Arguably, there should be a lot higher speed limits around town.
Which is why it's so difficult to get speeds lowered for, it's all car, preference. It's all vehicular preference. It's not like, how many people are walking and things like that.
Safety.
So with
Yeah.
without.
But it's all through the lens of cars.
Yeah, it's fine to keep it there. If, I mean, that's,
I
you
think
were
it's
just saying
accurate.
that's how it's used, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For driveway, specifically because we've had conversations about it in other contexts, to say it is vehicular travelway providing access to not more than 2 lots, dwelling units or principal uses. I guess this is for the Route 7 corridor. But I just wanted to make sure this is aligned with other docs. This does not apply to the rural area, but in those examples, we've been pushing more to encourage a common driveway to multiple places, so you don't have multiple entries,
Yep.
that kind of thing. Is there a consideration in the corridor where that could come into play?
Well, I think the effect of this is that it gives someone the opportunity to argue that if they're doing a small form-based zoning development and that it's only got two units, 2 lots that are served, then it doesn't have to include one of the street types. It would be that those 2 are served by a driveway, and so that's all right. It would be basically the thing below when there's a requirement for one of the street types, which would include the access drive. That's probably the lowest functional street type. So that's one implication. I'm not sure that gets at what you're talking about.
So that, it is specifically for 2 lots then?
Well, this is, providing access to not more than 2. So you can have 2, but at the point you are serving 3, it's no longer a driveway, so someone would not be able to say, it's just a driveway, and it would have to be something that is going to be one of the street types, which includes the access street type.
Yeah, I get that.
I think that could be how you apply it.
That makes sense to
I think
me.
we ought to strike dwelling units out of there, because if we're just saying it's not more than 2 lots, dwelling units or principal uses, so that's like 2 dwelling units. And if we have a 50-unit apartment building, that, we're going to be serving all 50 plus 50 next door.
Yeah,
So-
that would be confusing.
So-
Yeah.
So you would still say it could be a 50-unit apartment and it would be a driveway, you wouldn't apply a street type.
Well, I don't know, wouldn't that be served as a driveway?
Well, I think the intention of this is to to push people in the direction of using the street types. And so you have this floor that exists that you don't. It's kind of like the carve-out, and then beyond that, you use the street types.
So apartment buildings need the street types.
Would need a street type, which would make sense, because anything around that structure, you would want to use the actual street types that are defined in the code.
It's kind of like, it's analogous to some public works standards where there will be a number, it's usually more than 2, but it's a number that maybe it's 10 or 20, where if it's a 20-unit apartment building or 2 10s, you would have to meet a code specified or a public works specified street.
Yeah, when I was thinking of this, the examples that came up, it makes sense thinking that street types would kick in. My examples don't really apply.
But we do say, we say or on all these 3 things, so it's 2 lots, which could each have an IDX on them, or 2 principal uses, each having an IDX on them, or 2 little houses.
Right, but the driveway to an IDX or a multi-dwelling unit, housing unit, would have street types around it that it would be incorporating. It wouldn't be just a driveway.
But wouldn't it be the driveway that gets you into the lot to get to the parking, to use those
It would be the street type that would take you into the lot.
Well, then what is the
Yeah, I
driveway
mean, I
for?
see the,
I mean, if we're saying, we're also saying it could be two principal uses. We're not saying that it needs to be a street type. Or is that defined in the specific sections where it says access must be by one of the street types and not by the driveway?
that is a good question. Well, the street types specifically aren't defined in building types, but the, where's the street type? Well, there's, no, I was just thinking, like, there's an access street type, but that specifically says it is to, it's an access way to the rear of a business.
You mean an alley?
Well, then there's service alley, yeah, right? Is a business park street type
What page is that on? Just
32? I mean, at that point, you're talking, it's really an entry into a parking lot,
yeah.
is what you're getting at, which would be an entry from a street type, which by definition, would be a driveway. That's not what jumps to mind when I think of driveway, but I could see that. If this is one of those definitions that is used in form-based zoning in some way, I'm happy to default to that because I feel like, let's see, street type should cover access around a building, but I don't know if nitpicky getting into a parking lot creates issues.
Yeah, so this standard Smart Code 9.2 definition of driveway is a vehicular lane within the lot, often leading to a garage.
Yeah, so that's talking residential-ish or,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm also happy to say that this is one of those things that if it comes up as a point of contention, we could address it.
Well, I've just been looking at access street type and trying to understand, let's see, I think it applies,
Just rear.
we don't have a definition of that, of access street. Is that me doing that?
I think that's Megan.
Oh,
Could you word search driveway? Is it, where's driveway used?
Where's the word driveway used in?
On 29, there's site access, where it says
Yes, there
driveway
you
driveway with residential, non-residential, mixed use, shared driveways. So, you know, I'm thinking that maybe we just take out, I mean, if we could just take out dwelling units out of this definition of driveway, then
I'd be okay with that. You could have the same problem with principal uses, I guess, but
Yeah.
dwelling units does confuse it.
yeah.
Would there be an objective, any objections to getting rid of dwelling units in the definition of driveway?
No.
All right. So it would say access to not more than 2 lots or principal uses?
Yeah.
Right, because otherwise street type would kick in.
By lots, do we mean building lots?
I'm guessing, yeah.
Yes.
Right? No, I don't. Just saying.
Yeah, I guess any use,
Lots
lot and
isn't
building, yeah,
defined, but
lot
building lot
is
is.
interchangeable, I believe.
The next definition uses lot as well.
Oh, boy. So,
So let's stick with lot.
yeah, then do we, under building lot, would we say a building lot, also known as a lot?
No.
I guess not.
As opposed to like draw lots.
Sometimes being a perfectionist causes problems too. I'm okay with just keeping lots the way they are.
Okay.
In reference, but you're right, you're not wrong.
Okay.
Okay. Are we actually getting off the first page? Definitions?
Next page.
Figured our schedule might have issues when I noted how long it took me to get through the definitions. Let's see. Well, there's an extra period at the end of the green definition. And for gallery, part of me wanted to challenge the word covered, being that it's any covered passage.
I think that's the way it's normally seen as.
Okay. Well, because we had, I'll parking lot that for me. There was some other reference we had to, there was a street type that had to be covered, and I challenged whether or not it had to be covered, and I was wondering if those two things were tied together, but in this case, I'll look at that later.
Let's see, it's shown here. It's really coming down to these building elements.
And not that covered is a bad thing, especially with weather and that sort of thing. It's all good.
Okay.
And for this document, do we agree that it's low impact development, not design? I recall having that conversation and I didn't remember where we landed.
Which definition are you looking at?
Low impact development?
Oh,
I mean, we've used design and development interchangeably for lid. That's mostly just from a consistency standpoint.
Yeah.
I'm not triggered.
I thought that low impact development would use more.
Well, let's keep it. Yeah, that was the discussion we had. Okay, development it is. Under open space, public, there's just a grammatical thing. It's maintained for the use and enjoyment of the general public, health, safety, and welfare of the general public.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to add supporting the health, safety, and welfare.
Supporting the,
Yeah, so enjoyment of the general public, supporting the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. Habitat preservation, agriculture, or urban. Yeah, it just didn't seem right. Is adding supporting the bad grammatically to anybody?
No? Makes sense.
Okay.
Yep, it's fine.
The definition of path. I would argue for a comma after open.
Sure.
And conceptually, though, this seems that it would not apply to neighborhood paths, or it wouldn't apply to neighborhoods. Like, how,
Well, when you say it wouldn't apply to neighborhood paths, you mean like just a gravel or a
well,
beaten
if
path?
we're saying a path is a pedestrian way traversing a park, open, or rural area,
Yeah.
that excludes neighborhoods,
Well,
doesn't it?
well, the open area would be, I mean, I have read it as, it's basically grassed area. You know, it's not a path if it's between two buildings and it's paved. But I think, I mean, I'm getting your point. If you see open as only fields, then what about neighborhoods? But it's,
If open can apply to all of that, I mean, I think we all know what the idea behind paths is.
So where are we, what is the specific
Path.
path?
so it's used, well, that's interesting because, well, pathways is used as part of linkages. Future streets and paths, that's reference to those lines on the regulating plan.
Right, connectivity between centers, street corridors, and neighborhoods.
Yeah, I would focus on the connectivity part more than, who cares where,
What it
what it
traverses.
traverses, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So a pedestrian way
Connecting.
Yeah,
that is
directly.
not a sidewalk.
I mean, it's used in some of the character district descriptions. Sidewalks and paths connect to surrounding neighborhoods and corridors.
We have so few of them. Let's just call it a pedestrian way connecting directly with the sidewalk network.
I'm good with that.
And get rid of the, you know,
What it
last thing
traverses.
we want to do is get somebody hung up on whether something constitutes a path or not.
Agreed.
I like that. Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right.
So if it doesn't connect to a sidewalk,
Yeah, I think
does.
we have to keep the ideally connecting directly with the sidewalk. At least in our neighborhood, there are paths that cut through houses and there are no sidewalks, so they're connecting streets.
Yeah.
And ideally, you'd have a sidewalk there eventually, but I think those kind of
That's a good
neighborhood
point.
cutovers
That's
are
a
Yeah.
really good point. Last one on that page for me was the primary facade is basically saying that it usually faces the most important street, which I completely understand. Is there a priority in how we identify the most important street?
the principal street, yeah, the principal and secondary, so that is, I mean, that's one way of answering the question, is
So
that it would be on the principal or primary street.
Right, then I would argue we should say that it usually faces the principal street.
Yeah.
Or if everyone's good with just keeping it as is, that's fine too. Just seems.
Yeah, primary
Fine,
would
either way. I
be,
mean, it says usually faces.
it
so
should be
it's not-
primary rather than,
So just usually faces the primary street.
yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, if you wanted to say usually the primary as opposed to the secondary.
I was just trying to tie things to objective things
Yeah.
when there's a choice. All right. Last page.
Well, then we have
Not
the next
last
one,
page.
principal frontage, which sort of covers the same things as primary facade, but I'm not sure how they're different. It says the principal frontage bears the address if it's on a corner lot. Where then we have the primary facade, where we say for a building fronting multiple streets, a primary facade usually faces the most important street. But the principal frontage, it seems like you can choose which one you want to bear the address. And the measure of minimum lot width. So I guess that's an important definition.
That last, and the measure of minimum lot width didn't seem to make sense to me.
Why?
Maybe it's a grammatical thing.
Well, it's just, you have to just pick, if you have a corner lot, you have to pick which side is going to be the front. And then whatever side you pick the front, that's what you measure the minimum lot width from. Is that correct?
I think you got it.
So like, in other words,
Okay.
corner lots
We'll keep it.
are usually a little bit more funky looking than regular lots on streets. And some people really like that, they find that to be advantageous. Other people don't care for it at all. So,
I mean, it's an alternative to saying that the building would have to have two principal on a corner lot, which is kind of the old way.
like, for example, they usually have a substantial front yard and substantial side yard, but can have like practically no backyard, which some people like.
But the phrase principal frontage is not used except in this definition. So we may have one of those situations where,
And I really don't understand how adding and the measure of minimum lot width makes sense.
Do we have a minimum lot width criteria in this? Or is it all just based on setbacks?
Well, if we were to keep this definition that's not apparently referenced in the document, how does the measure of minimum lot width apply to principal frontage? That's my question.
Hmm.
Like, what is that relation? These two things seem not related to me,
Yeah, I hear that.
and I can't tell if it's just my brain or,
Well, I mean, I'm struggling to understand why we have definitions that aren't used in them.
so I had made a note that I had referred to, but we didn't actually discuss, that you can see here, this had to do with the frontage zone occupancy, and some codes, as my note says, use the term minimum primary frontage coverage. And it could be that you're seeing that definition because there was that phrase might have been used, but it isn't used in ours. And so there may not actually be a need for it, because, like I said, I didn't find it.
Well,
yeah,
it's used here in the building types on page.
Primary frontage?
oh, right,
Well,
because
no, it's sort of like a
No, the lot width
melding
is-
of the two definitions.
Yeah.
On page 23,
Lot width
for
is.
instance,
Oh, lot width is, yeah, lot width
lot
is important.
standards, lot width slash primary frontage. Now, we just looked at primary facade, and now we're looking at principal frontage,
Right.
but we don't have primary frontage.
Right, and that's where I think it could be one of the situations where that word got switched.
So,
It should be, if you're going to define it, it should say principal frontage, or you should change those instances where it says primary to match the definition.
maybe it's easiest to do that in the definitions rather than go through each building type.
Why don't we just call principal facade and primary frontage?
Or why don't we
Does
just
that
say?
make sense?
Why don't we just have one definition?
Well, if principal frontage isn't used at all, it seems to make sense to replace that with the term that's used, unless there's a value to having this.
Well,
But primary facade isn't used
I
either.
have to say, I kind of
It's
like
primary
the granular
frontage.
detail because it provides guidance on platting, how somebody might plat out a neighborhood. and how that neighborhood, could emerge. And, but I think principal frontage doesn't make any sense if the reference in the text is primary frontage. That seems like, makes complete sense to me to
Yeah.
change that.
If anything, yeah, we would
Merging
make
it
that
too.
primary, but I would still argue for getting rid of "and the measure of minimum lot width," because that doesn't seem to make any sense to me.
But it's noted exactly with that here. It says primary frontage, and then it provides a measurement. So it provides a reference point from where you measure that.
Measure of minimum lot width.
Okay, if we're getting rid of principal frontage, we still need a definition for primary frontage, and there's not one in here.
Well, so
No, I
It's
think-
either primary facade, which is definition 10, or 11 is principal frontage. So we need to pick which one we want to call primary frontage, unless we want to change the reference in every single one of the building types.
Is primary facade used in the document?
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, we just get rid of the word principal and use primary, because that would be consistent.
Primary
Okay.
Primary
frontage.
yeah.
frontage and primary facade. So that just seems to
Yeah,
make some more consistent sense, but then provides a little bit of granular information about how we are suggesting all of this kind of come together as an assemblage, because I think the how you provide direction on, incremental retrofit or successional planning, organization of the land, as we transform from a car-oriented suburban area to something, that is maybe more towards a traditional neighborhood, is important. And so even if it's just as terminology in the regulations for, a while, it's still
how about we just
a
combine those
vision,
two
I think.
definitions as primary
Yeah,
frontage?
you
Because
could.
they do refer to the main street facing face of the principal building, where the entrances, porches, storefront signs present the public face of the building.
you want to combine primary frontage with primary facade.
That's-
Is that the second one that you want to combine it with?
Yeah, they call it primary facade, or primary frontage, which is the way it's referred to.
Why would you want to make the definition compound like that? I mean, doesn't it get cleaned up if you change principal frontage
primary.
to primary frontage, because that's the one that's used, and then you could insert something like, on most lots, frontage on the primary street, period. On corner lots, the private frontage designated to bear the address and principal entrance to the building, and the measure of the minimum lot width.
Say that again, Dean?
I just was saying, change principal to primary, because this is kind of a repeated error in the text. And then it really zeroes in on corner lots, so it begs the question, well, what about things that are non-corner lots? So I was thinking you could say something like, on most lots, the frontage on the primary street.
Right. But since primary frontage is where it's used throughout the code,
Yep.
shouldn't the definition of primary frontage not just start with on corner lots, blah, blah,
That's what I
blah?
was saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. There would be something inserted in front of it to address those
Okay.
traditional.
So how about we just insert the primary facade definition in front of it? And then we take out for a building fronting multiple streets, a primary facade usually faces the most important, take out that.
It's the
Because-
difference between the building and the lot. The primary facade is that side of the building, and the primary or principal frontage is that side of the lot.
Yeah,
It's the
so
difference
one's
between the building
one's
and the lot.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
got it.
and I get the measure of minimum lot width now. It's just very confusing at first. But
Yeah.
yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so does anybody have a suggestion?
Just change principal to primary, call it good.
Well, no, because you can't define primary frontage with on corner lots, you have to, because it's the corner lot is the exception to everything. So you can't use an exception to define the main thing that
Right.
this
You-
code refers to. Every-
Insert a sentence
as Dean's
before
saying,
that
we
says
gotta
on most
come
lots,
up
it's
with
the
a sentence.
frontage on the primary street.
That seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
the frontage on the primary street?
And then,
I like
on
that.
corner lots, that subset of lots,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah.
Good.
Yeah,
Sounds good to me.
yeah, that works.
Okay. What's next?
Really detailed, but on 17, you need a comma after planters to be consistent in our use of commas.
I love it. That's what we're talking about. Oxford comma.
We are cooking with
Some people
gas.
have a radar for those kinds of missing commas.
Drives me nuts. I'm sure there's a condition. All right. Not going to get into vertically oriented public banners.
Oh, building envelope is used in here in the regulating plan definition.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
That's
Wasn't a wasted
good that we
definition.
resurrected it. Okay. Secondary facade.
Mm-hmm. I see that.
I just had to reread it. I'm assuming that in that last sentence, it intended to say a secondary facade usually faces the lesser streets. Instead of a primary facade. So we'll change primary to secondary?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's a good catch.
It's not good when my comment was, really? Okay. And those roof pitch ratios consistent with architect input?
Which one's that?
The 0 to 12 and 18 to 12?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
The substantial reconstruction, this is just more as a concept to me. When it's saying that it's for which the cost equals or exceeds 50% of the market value of the structure before the start of construction, it just seemed that that could be problematic.
I'm just going to find, so, okay, so that came in with stormwater. Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
But it's defined differently in the stormwater reg, I think.
So we don't.
I mean, because a
a
cost of
structure.
reconstruction could, I mean, it's going to cost more if you're using better materials. I was just wondering if cost should be the driver in that
That's a real good point.
equation, but at the same time, I don't know what it could be replaced with.
But that phrase isn't used anywhere else in the regs. Substantial reconstruction is used in stormwater only, but it doesn't pop up anyplace else.
Do we need it?
Are you sure?
Well,
Oh, it
it should-
didn't
I-
come up in your search?
Yeah, I think it,
I'm-
our intention, I think, was more of a reference to the scope of the work that was being done. The cost just seems, I think, I agree. I think the cost is, what are we incentivizing people to do the cheapest possible thing,
I mean, that seems to be what it would encourage.
Yeah, we don't want
So
to,
is it 50% of the square feet of the building is being.
That would be a good
More-
I feel like that was part of the
would seem more,
conversation that we had.
Relevant to me.
So called the floor area exceeds 50% of the floor area of the,
Does that, I mean, if it's where it's used as in stormwater though, if that's the.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to keep a definition like this in there, you may want to call it substantial building reconstruction or something to distinguish it from substantial reconstruction that's used for stormwater, because I think if you kept the definition, it's just going to create confusion with the way it's used in the stormwater section.
I mean, is the intent to trigger additional stormwater protection on that?
This
property?
definition, I don't think that this is really linked to that usage, because this is about buildings,
Right.
and buildings only, and the stormwater's more than
More about
buildings.
sites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But where it's referenced in the stormwater section, substantial rehabilitation, is it used in such a way that substantial rehabilitation triggers additional stormwater?
Yeah, if the combination of new impervious area created and the redevelopment or substantial reconstruction of existing surfaces, so it's about the impervious surface.
Substantial reconstruction of existing surfaces.
So that could include like a roof and a part of the driveway or something like that, or the parking area. If those two things are less than 3,000, you're okay.
well, maybe since it doesn't show up in this regulation, maybe we just strike it.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
would be my-
I guess it,
Defined right
it,
there.
But that's specifically for drainage, and I think this would be more in terms of, like, not saying you're adding more paving or whatever, it's like, if you're adding 50% of the square footage of the building, we'd have to be specific about what we want to measure square footage of building or impervious surface. I mean,
So in
For
the.
that,
It
it's
might
clear
confuse
that
the
it's-
stormwater.
So in the town
having
of
this
Westford,
definition.
we use that as a trigger for when a certificate of occupancy is required for certain kinds of development. So it's important, but if it doesn't have any kind of link to that sort of procedural trigger, I don't know that it's
I mean,
important.
the way I'm looking at this, the link is there, but it's kind of tenuous. If you look at this section in the stormwater, it's the one place where that phrase is used. It does create an opportunity for someone to ask the question, well, when is this reconstruction substantial?
Yeah.
And then if we do go to this definition, and then if we think that the definition of structure is so broad, as Brian pointed out earlier tonight, it would include the impervious surfaces, then maybe it is helpful, but it's helpful in that it says it's based on dollar value. What I was hearing people say before is that they weren't sure that that was the right thing to hone in on dollar value.
Well, if we're trying to address stormwater, that seems a silly thing to base a requirement on.
Is there any concern that having the word substantial reconstruction there creates confusion if we just remove this definition?
Why don't we just take the substantial out? Does that change the meaning of that in this section here?
Just redevelopment or reconstruction?
Yeah, and then it ties it purely to square footage, nothing substantive or not about it, because that's really, we're trying to mitigate an impact that's going to have an impact to the site, and that seems like the scope of the project would have more of a bearing on that than what kinds of finishes somebody used.
Well, yeah, but I don't think we should take out substantial, because that has impact on what law we have to follow for the wastewater system, which is, in the packet, where there's different criteria for substantial, which is more than 50%, or minor, which is less than 50%.
Or is it somewhere else than other in that spot? I'm just,
Is that the same thing that's in our packet?
oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure what you were referring to.
This is the language, the language,
Regulation, our zoning regs,
yep.
Article 5.
Yeah, that was pulling the language that's in form-based zoning and putting it in the traditional zoning in the stormwater overlay. So it's pulling from the place that we see here into the default regs.
Oh, I see, okay.
So that it is using the same idea. It's basically stamping it out in a different part of the regs.
Well, maybe we just clarify in the definition section, and that would be the way to do this?
I would say, don't worry about that Article 5 thing, because that's going to flow from whatever you decide here, or at least it should, because it should be consistent with whatever you have here. So if you settle what you want here, then that other thing can be updated. But here, what I'm hearing is, does it need to be substantial reconstruction, or could it just be reconstruction? And I'm thinking it all comes down to a situation where someone like Revy is, hearing about a project, and he's thinking, or could be thinking, that's changing a lot, and you now are subject to the stormwater requirements. And they might say, well, I didn't substantially reconstruct that portion of the parking lot, or I didn't substantially reconstruct that portion of the building, and so you can't count those square feet and rope me into these standards. So that's where the definition comes in, and if does this definition help? If it's there, Revy could say, well, tell me how much what's the cost? What was there, and what the cost of what you replaced it with? And was it 50% of the market value before the start? And if the answer to that is yes, then he would say, and that's substantial reconstruction per the regs, and so you are subject to those stormwater sections. If they say, well, here are the invoices, and it's only 40%, then he
I
would say
just
it
don't
doesn't
like
apply.
tying costs to that at all.
I don't, I mean, we're
Doesn't-
we're
Yeah. Well, then-
incentivizing people
Yeah.
to not do things nicely in the corridor, which is a
So if we
place
take
where
dollars out of it, then what would, how would we resolve a debate between someone, a property owner, and someone who's administering this, where they say, well, I reconstructed it, but it wasn't substantially reconstructed. And then so I hear you say, take out substantial, and then the question becomes, well, was it reconstructed? And they may say, well, I repaired it. I mean, we may still need a definition, or we may just fly for a while without a definition, and it's just left to be sorted out by practice.
But what would Robbie do with something that's substantially reconstructed or not substantially reconstructed? Say somebody wanted to replace the roof that's leaking, and it costs a lot, and it's a worthless structure.
Right, and so, I mean, it may be a moot discussion because it's not 3,000 square feet of roof, and so he doesn't even look at those things. So for some instances, that kind of change, he's going to say, I don't even have to worry about that because it's less than 3,000 square feet. If someone had a really big building and they were redoing the roof, I'm not sure if just changing the roof is, I mean, the value of repairing the roof that's just a fixed part of the building. As compared to the building in its entirety, there's still a lot more value that you're not affecting by repairing the roof.
Well, I don't know, I mean, you could, in the Kmart Plaza in South Burlington,
Yeah.
you could build a nice single-family house for more than that building is worth, because it's just such a crappy building. And it's falling apart and old, and that's the original. So would you say, this little house on that lot would be a substantial reconstruction of, like, compared to, like, 40,000 square feet of crappy space?
Well, again, this is looking at an already developed site, and it's capturing the site for stormwater purposes when you're typically adding more impervious surface. And so if you're adding more than 3,000 and it gets over the 5,000 or, yeah.
I mean, if it's less than 3,000 square feet, it's exempt from this section.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
To me, that's pretty straightforward, and we could just get rid of this definition if it's not used anywhere else, because I don't
Because it
think.
feels like this bullet's all about an exemption. And so if it's substantial reconstruction of less than 3,000 square feet, I mean, how does substantial reconstruction, the way it's defined here, I mean, it's hard to imagine that that's of less than 3,000 square feet. You know what I mean?
I don't view these two as related. I mean,
It seems totally,
yeah, they seem like
Totally
they're different things, and that to me, if you're redoing impervious surfaces of greater than 3,000 square feet, that,
So let's say that the Kmart Plaza was pre-zoning, and so there was no stormwater regulation on it at all. And they were going to create or substantially reconstruct. So let's say they were going to rebuild the building in the exact same footprint, okay? Is that substantial reconstruction that will be more than 3,000 square feet, because we know how big it is, and thus we would then throw them in the requirements for stormwater, if they're rebuilding the building in that footprint?
yeah.
Okay, that's a pretty clear example of substantial reason. But let's say they're not taking the building down, and they're doing interior work that costs a lot of money, but it's a lot of money, let's just say. When would we know, short of it, the building coming down, that it's substantial reconstruction? Maybe it's just a matter of, it has to be a demolition and a rebuild, but where is that written, is what I'm getting at.
I see.
I guess I'm missing the link between this, what we're talking about here, and this definition of substantial reconstruction to that up there.
Because this kicks in when someone has an existing developed site and they're doing some work. And that work can be adding a building and adding pavement, and it can also be changing the existing site by making, reconstructing a building, or, bomagging the parking area or something like that, and putting more pavement down in the same place.
So would removing the word substantial, I mean, if you're talking about redoing the entire, like knocking it down and rebuilding it, or just redoing the inside, if you're redoing the entire inside of a building, that's reconstruction.
Yeah, well, this was written to say it had to be a lot. It was more than just kind of modest changes. And so there was some intent behind having substantial. If you take it out, then it makes it easier for Revy to say this property could be subject to the stormwater requirements, but it does put more burden on the property owner, who may be thinking, hey, all I'm doing is a modest little change, but it is, it is reconstruction. I mean, the easiest thing to measure is going to come down to dollars.
But you're also talking about on a footprint of greater than 3,000 square feet, or 3,000 square feet or greater. This isn't just like a home project.
Right. I get it, that we are talking typically about commercial situations. And if the desire of the commission is that essentially if you have an existing commercial site, and even a modest change is going to put you into this place where you must add stormwater controls, I get that as an objective. It may not be the most popular objective.
Well, and I certainly don't want to be unfair to the process. I don't know, Brian, if you have any thoughts on this in general. Just hearing where we are talking about that. This discussion is going to go bigger than what we have right now. So I would say we either leave things the way they are. I do have a big problem with using cost in that definition. So if we're going to keep that definition, then we would not be in a position to warn a hearing for next time, or just say that we're ready to move these amendments. Because the argument is that we need to keep the definition we need to keep the definition in the definitions. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think Dee makes a good point that it's going to come up. Stormwater is expensive enough and big enough that someone is doing something, they're going to look at this and try to find a way to not have to pay for it. So if we don't define it, we're either putting their office in a really hard position, or we're creating a loophole for people. I agree that cost is not an ideal way to do it, but I've been sitting here, I can't think of a better way to do it exactly. The square footage gets confusing if you're talking about interior, because you're talking about impervious surfaces, so you're not talking about, I take that as exterior impervious surfaces, because we're talking about stormwater. So square footage pulls in the building. maybe I'm just tired. I can't come up with a better thing. I do have a specific question on structure. If we keep the definition of substantial reconstruction, the improvement of the structure or market value of the structure, I've lost my train of thought here. Are you talking about improvement of the structure? I think of improvement of a roof. But you're saying the market value of the structure is just the market value of that roof, or is it the market value of the entire building?
Well, that's
Is
just
that-
it. To me, there's so many things that go
To
into this,
clarify
it
it.
just doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, the only way that I would be happy moving forward is if we didn't have the definition here to avoid that, but I understand the can of worms that it opens if we don't have it. So it sounds like, especially given the time, and I realize you weren't here just to listen to definitions.
It's been riveting.
I'm sure it has.
I missed all the town plan meetings, so, you gotta make up.
Makeup.
You were watching them.
Does focusing on the
You were the one.
exterior of the structure in the definition change things? Or other improvement of the exterior of a structure taking place for which the cost equals blah, 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 50%? Because that would get to, makes a distinction between money being put into the upgrades to the interior, which I do not want to discourage anyone from doing, versus site improvements, which are precisely the things that would create potentially stormwater impacts. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think that the trick becomes, if you say exterior of the structure, then
You need to list
do
what
you
that means.
make
Or the
things?
site, something referencing the
It just makes things a
exterior
little
of the
bit more
structure or
confusing
the
about the
site.
existing impervious areas. I mean, I would,
Okay.
Well, wait a minute, that's a good point.
Do you think I'm onto
Because
something?
we're
Yeah.
talking about something that's happening outside. To
Yeah,
do
yeah.
A renovation, change carpet and stuff like that, that shouldn't kick in stormwater review at
No.
all. So maybe we can say, any addition, rather than reconstruction or rehabilitation, any addition taking place for which the cost exceeds 50% of the structure before the start of construction of the improvement. You can just specifically say addition, so it doesn't cover a facade renovation, a re-roofing, interior fit-up renovations. It's just the addition that's going on that's going to cause more
Impervious.
wastewater impact and because of more impervious surface.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I would opt for.
Is a parking lot considered an addition? If they put a new parking lot in the property?
Or redoing the parking lot from gravel to pavement? Would that be an
would have been.
addition or?
Packed gravel would be impervious. So it wouldn't be the addition of impervious surface, but it may be, if, it sounds like you want to take out the idea of reconstruction and just make it the addition of impervious
Yeah,
surface.
it's
And that's a pretty
it's
significant change,
Yeah.
although it's going to make it apply in fewer places, because but you may take the regs out of the places where you don't want it to apply. But where you did want it to apply before was in those cases where someone was making changes, making an investment, and if it was worth half the cost of what was there before, then the regs said, and you're going to step it up as far as stormwater.
I feel like we
Well, I
want, we
can
want the
see-
thing to be able to say, yes, we want to encourage you to redevelop the interior of your building to make it a better building and this sort of thing, but not have, I'm going to have to redo my stormwater if I do that, right? I mean, that seems like a real problem.
You don't want to
Yeah.
disincentivize somebody from doing a nice improvement. Yeah, so it's changing the basis on which the calculation kicks in, or is triggered.
I always would, I mean, that is, when we were talking about it, it specifically is talking about impervious surfaces
Yeah.
that are either created or being reconstructed.
But this talks about cost, so why, we just,
Right,
why
I-
just make it consistent?
Well, I don't even know why we're talking about buildings and interiors and all that stuff. I mean, impervious surfaces, yes, a building is on an impervious surface, but unless you're,
Or it is an
I mean,
impervious
it
surface
is
too.
an, yes.
Most buildings.
So can we
Yeah.
just go with that one to kick in when the wastewater gets looked at? And not have this, a renovation kick in wastewater in this definition?
This is, you haven't even talked about changing this before, the stuff that's on the screen right now.
Yeah, I think that is square. It's,
Blow it up a little bit? It's hard to
Oh, sorry,
see.
yeah.
I mean,
Squinting.
Are you?
I'm squinting.
while you're reading that, from a procedural perspective, my initial goal was to at least get through these definitions and be able to say, okay, we're going to warn a hearing for the next time where the modified version can be reviewed, and then we go through that and can take next steps. Is that something that would be possible to do with the caveat of this definition will be worked out and there will be something proposed in that
Well,
document that's warned?
So you can't,
We have to
warn the
have
hearing
the
tonight, so
complete-
it'd be to have the documents with the motion and all that report and that stuff, so that you could then warn the hearing.
So could we plan on warning the hearing next meeting, but know that we're going to have this discussion before we do
Yeah,
that?
I mean, you could. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're
I say we do that.
falling over the
'cause
finish
it's-
line with a football, that's
Right.
close.
Yeah, I say we do that because I don't see us solving this tonight.
Okay.
And I want to at least give Brian something that's not listening to definitions for 2 hours.
Can I make just one suggestion
Yeah.
again? I guess I've made it already. Since the 3,000 square feet of impervious surface is going to kick in wastewater. but-
Stormwater.
Or stormwater, sorry.
Yeah.
But I think we're all feeling right now that you shouldn't be penalized for doing a renovation or thermally improving your building, making it more efficient, et cetera, which can cost quite a lot. I'd propose we just take out substantial reconstruction here entirely, because that doesn't refer to substantial reconstruction unless I've missed it. And it doesn't seem like substantial reconstruction is listed anywhere in here that, would need a definition of it.
You're
But-
saying take out the definition?
Take out the definition of substantial reconstruction.
Right, but then we're getting circular because the
Yeah.
reason, when that was proposed the first time, the reason that we needed a definition is because what does substantial reconstruction mean?
Mhm.
So we need a definition. But what we're not agreeing on is what that definition should be outside of, we don't believe that cost should be the driving factor.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can frame it with some tools so that next time it's going to be easier.
Yeah, I think it'd be
Rather
good to have
than-
that context because, I don't see it. Spinning.
All right.
All right,
So
so let's do that. Parting shot there, the definition of square has an extra period. Nice. So we can get rid of that.
I disagree.
I mean, it really does tie the whole definition together, but.
square. So what are the objectives as far as the remainder of the agenda for tonight?
I'm reading into it, but I assume that you're here for the sidewalk, or is that part of it? Because we would. Yeah, and that's actually the next thing, right? Oh, no, we had sidewalks after.
Well, stormwater, but if you're skipping. all
Yeah,
of
I
that.
think we skip stormwater, talk about sidewalks. And then next time incorporate the stormwater discussion with wrapping up that definition.
Bless you.
And I want to make sure we're talking about, this is the neighborhood development or redevelopment being implemented using form-based zoning that has the sidewalk requirement, but there is no other sidewalk on the street, and there was a dispute about why build a sidewalk if there isn't any other connectivity? And the DRB requested help?
So I would, what I think I'm asking for is for the planning commission, so it's correct. This is it's a dead-end street off of Route 7 called Maple Leaf Lane. There's 22 houses there, there's no sidewalk. We're doing an infill development towards the end of it. In implementing all of the standards, it's much easier to do that in a greenfield development where you aren't trying to match an existing neighborhood fabric. The biggest concerns that most of the neighbors had were, I'm going to have to put 200 feet of sidewalk at the very end of the street that just isn't gonna, it's gonna look stupid right there. And the DRB doesn't have the latitude in the current language to waive that requirement, that sort of street requirement. So it's not only the sidewalks, because with that streetscape that's laid out, you have to put in street trees. Well, in all of your models, all of the utilities are underground. There are poles there, there's aerial. So the trees are only going to get so high, and then they're going to be cut. We built at the beginning of the street, we built 2 homes on another infill development and turned the house that used to face Route 7 to orient it to that street. We put street trees in front of that. I put street trees in front of it, but they're behind the power lines, not right next to the street. They're behind the power lines. So I don't have a problem with putting trees in there, and I think it'll look fine. All of the other things seem to be meshing pretty well. Even the Build 2 zone is matching pretty close to the existing facades of the street. I'm just asking to see if the planning commission would insert waiver language where the DRB can use its discretion to waive the sidewalk and allow different tree plantings to more match the conditions on the street. So it's basically to give them latitude in the waiver thing. I mean, there's a whole list of things that they're allowed to waive. Sidewalks is not one of them. That's what I'm asking. So we've gotten sketch plan approval. It was such a concern to the neighbors that I'm not going to start I know it takes months and months to do to change this stuff. I'm not going to start the project until next spring, so I'm just trying to feel it out. If it isn't something the board feels comfortable with doing, I put in 200 feet of sidewalk and it just looks stupid. So that's why I'm here.
Just to be clear, this was on your agenda, you didn't see the minutes, right? But this had been discussed by the commission before.
Yeah, so I saw sidewalk requirements, that's the only
Yeah, it was-
reason I came in. So I understood, and Dean had said that you had sent it to the planning commission. I'm not talking about a carpet, hey, let's get rid of, your things. I'm just saying, make it a little more flexible to, with some of this infill development.
Yeah, and that from the discussion that we had, it's not a catch-22, but it's something where I feel like there needs to be more discussion input from the select board or somewhere, because
Pat's committee did talk about it.
at their meeting they did. Right, and the recommendation was to keep it the way it was, right?
Yeah.
Why?
Well,
Sorry?
no, the
Housing subcommittee hasn't talked about it.
Yeah. So where the discussion went was that the whole concept behind form-based zoning in general, if you're looking at the corridor and people have complained about, well, we don't want to do this one thing because it would look stupid or out of place or it doesn't make any sense. And I get that, but if you're looking at, when looking at future planning and looking for consistency, and as other things get upgraded over time, that timeline could be 20 years, can't say. If we granted the option to put a waiver on that, it would absolutely be given, and there would be no sidewalk built. And then the next development that happens on that street, they would do the same thing, and there would never end up being a sidewalk in a zone that was zoned with those characteristics. Some of the alternatives discussed were proposed in the initial discussion was, if we were to be able to grant a waiver there, have an alternative like contribute to a sidewalk fund or something where as that project could be put together, that's contributing to it. There's a lot of questions that would go with that kind of a concept, which is where I would want to have bigger input from select board and other committees just to know, well, how firm are we with the commitment to form-based zoning in these areas? Like, would we take that neighborhood out of form-based zoning or exempt something that way? Because I'm a big fan of having waivers to be able to have flexibility, and I understand the tough situation that DRB gets into, but I really think that this could just be, this could domino into lots of things don't happen because it wouldn't make sense without the rest of the surrounding development happening. So I was looking for a solution that would not force the building of sidewalks, because you're right, it looks out of place, doesn't make any sense, but create a mechanism for ensuring that there's some concept that eventually sidewalks get put in, like, and I'm not sure where the town stands on where they're adding sidewalks. I know the PAS committee, or there have been sidewalks added at various parts in town. Quite frankly, I don't understand the funding mechanisms behind all that. But that's where my thought was, if there was a way to contribute to some fund that goes into a sidewalk fund, that would be one way of doing it. The easement's already there. Then I would be comfortable with promoting a waiver so they could say, yes, this doesn't make any sense at all. And I think when that was posed to the housing committee and they went through it as well, they just said, well, they're probably not in a position to argue for creating funds or any of that. So it becomes more of a bigger discussion that needs to happen, and I'd just like to hear where the town stands or wants to stand, and how serious are we with the form-based zoning in the areas that we have it. And that's not to say that change can't happen, because we've already, we as a commission decided to take out one of the nodes that was in the plan because it made no sense to have a node at the Martindale, it's the Martindale intersection. So absolutely the change can happen. I just don't know that unless we were to say, take that section out of form-based zoning, but it's form-based zoning that's enabling the development that you want to do, right? So it's a, for lack of a better thing, it's a rock and a hard place where I'm not sure what we can do. Because without a doubt, if we grant the option to waiver, there will never be sidewalks built.
I don't think that's true, because there's waivers on other sections of that code, so why are there any waivers in that code at all? Because if you want every aspect of that code followed, don't have any waivers.
It depends on the waiver, and I'm happy to look at the section, but in this case, if a waiver was granted, I don't think there's any question that the DRB would say, okay, you don't have to build sidewalks. There's no funding that goes into something that could be used for sidewalks at a later date. It's just, there would be no sidewalks. So then what happens if there's another, in the next year or 2 or 5, there are a couple of houses there that get redeveloped into some other thing that fits into a form-based zoning building type, and they say, well, okay, the sidewalk would look stupid. And it might look less stupid if there was already sidewalk and we're filling in, and the town had a plan to fill in those gaps and expand it. But if that waiver is granted, in that case, I don't see how there would be sidewalks built, just because of the incremental patchwork. But that's not to say it's not a discussion that needs to happen. When we first had it, I'm not sure where to go with that in terms of what our options are from a town standpoint. I'm just looking at it from a, what can the planning commission do, and our option would result in 0 sidewalk. And I'm really open to discussion or how to move this forward or address it.
I'm not willing to fight that hard for it. It's 200 feet of sidewalk. I'll just put it in. So, I'm not looking to piss off those neighbors down there, but I'm not going to spend a year working on, a fund for sidewalks. It just isn't worth it.
No, and I get that too, and I wouldn't put that on you to build the fund
I'm not gonna
at
do
all.
it. 200 feet of sidewalk, it's not the money. It's, I grew up in that neighborhood. The people that are doing it, that are voicing a legitimate concern, I said, well, I'll go see what I can do. It's no easy stroke. I was on the planning commission, because they said, well, even the DRB said, go get them to do it, and then you can come back. I said, well, takes months to change this stuff. It isn't a 2-week thing. So I told them I'd look at it. If the board feels that, it's something they can't do, I'm fine with it. I'll just put in the sidewalk.
It is a slippery slope.
And
Like
that's-
Jason's saying that, and we had a good talk about this, just to weigh alternatives to that, because, we all look at it like you're looking at it, or the neighbors are looking at it and say, well, that little one segment, is out of place. But at the same time, just like Jason was saying, that the incremental, if there's one stretch of sidewalk in the areas where, the form-based code is allowed, then we ought to keep the requirement throughout the whole thing, because as development happens, and it does,
This isn't going to be isolated, though.
it'll extend out.
I mean, this is going to happen in any residential area of the form-based zone. I mean, this is something that I'm glad that this issue came up, because it's something that does need a solution. That, as big of a fan of waivers as I am, I feel like it can't just be build it or don't. Like, to your point, it's not about the money. It's just about, this is what the rule says and it needs to be there, waive it or don't. What I would like to see, though, is if the town is serious about interconnected neighborhoods and putting those in, that's where I would like to see, if possible, the town to create a fund. And I don't understand the mechanics behind that or what would be needed. So maybe I need to have a discussion with somebody. But to be able to, I mean, is that something that you would be open to say, well, whatever the cost of that sidewalk would be, or if there's some metric that could
Yeah,
come
I
up
don't have
with
a
and
problem
say, throw it into a fund, you don't have to build it now, and then,
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Same with the trees. I'm not saying I don't want to put the trees there.
Yeah,
I'm saying
Right.
I want to put the trees where they're going to live.
right.
I understand everybody loves that stuff going down Route 7, all those street trees, but the ones on the other side of the sidewalks are the ones that are living.
Yeah,
The ones on this side of the sidewalks, they're all dying.
yeah.
But everybody says, no, we want those trees on that side of the sidewalk. Well, it's great, but they're dying. The other one,
So-
look at Jelly Mill. The ones on the other side of the sidewalk are doing pretty well.
Is there a way we can do a temporary waiver? And I'm still learning the system, but sort of while we figure it out a better solution, because I do think the number of years it will take for all of these houses to infill is going to be very long, because most of them aren't going to be under form-based zoning. They'll be bought and sold and redone. And so we're going to have a very long period of time in town where we'll have patchwork sidewalks if we don't have a waiver. And I'm on board with the slippery slope. I think sidewalks are a good thing to have, and I don't think we want to take that out of the equation. But I do worry that we're going to look silly and not have a solution.
The alternative fund makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Because we have places in the town where I'm on the paths committee, where we would love to have just an incremental section of sidewalk could be transformative. And we just finally, after, like 8-10 years, got a tiny little segment built between the Shelburne, the boat launch and the Shelburne Bay Park. And I mean, I
Yeah.
live there and I walk my dog there all the time, and it is transformative. It's been such a great addition, just this little segment.
Bay
And-
Road is another one.
Yeah, and so this, but the problem is, these things take so long, even though they bring such great quality of life, because we have to go and apply for a grant, or we have to find, there's putting together just a little bit of money here and there. It's tough in a little town like this. So to have a sidewalk fund where these priorities could be set, so we're actually incrementally making these advances that extend our network, our walkability and bikeability network, would be great, and have the funding to be able to actually take action on these things within our lifetimes,
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just, more and more people are really are wanting that and kind of expecting that as part of, a modern town, the way a modern town is run. So, I'm happy to get this feedback from Brian that as a developer, he doesn't object to needing to provide those funds. The objection is, it seems foolish to have to implement them in this kind of setting.
Not that it isn't good, you know, the thought process that, well, down the road, these are gonna be developed in form-based. This is sort of an odd little lot. It's a double lot on that street that has a single wide on it. There's no more single wides on that street, so the chances of 5, 10 years, most of those homes started as very small ranches. They've been enlarged. There's only been one tear down that I can remember, and that was built back as a single-family home.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way that street is sort of gelled. So I don't, and it's a dead end, so people aren't clamoring, and it would be a bad use of town funds to put a sidewalk on the street. It just is not. Bay Road is a much better, and Bay Road is not even the place to have a sidewalk. It's to have a path like Webster Road, a multi-use path. A sidewalk would not function on, would not be the best function on Bay Road. So Maple Leaf Lane, that they walk up the street, they go up the street, they cut through that path onto Bayfield, which again doesn't have any sidewalks. There's town-owned property right on the far corner of that cul-de-sac. A path could be made through there, right down to Bay Road. There's other places that things can be done, but.
And I guess
Yeah.
when I said temporary waiver, I was thinking sort of that projects like this wouldn't start putting in sidewalks while we figured out a fund or some better mechanism to do it. And I don't know if there's any way to do something like that, to say,
But
this isn't, we need to have
I don't think this has to be something that's terribly difficult to do.
if it could be done in time, then
I
I
think-
just hate to have
yeah.
6 of these go up with sidewalks.
Sure.
And then we figure out a fund and you have 6 neighborhoods with like
Sure.
little chunks.
I mean,
around.
I can, bring this up at our next Paths Committee meeting,
Yeah.
and we can, arrange to go speak to the Select Board about, their openness to this idea, and just get something set up. I don't think it needs to be a huge deal. The problem is that this ends up coming up over and over again with the DRB in this context and in other contexts. And, I appreciate that they feel put in an awkward position. And but the tendency is to just say, well, you don't have to do anything. There are some on the Development Review Board who feel strongly about that. So, how do we cut the right balance so that we're advancing the objectives of the town to increase walkability and safe bikeability, but are, doing it in a strategic and thoughtful way.
Yeah. And I think if there's a way to get that done in time, that would be perfect.
By the time construction starts next spring for your project.
Well,
I
Yeah,
guess.
before-
I've only gone through sketch plans, so I still have to, I have to generate plans for a final, and whether they have sidewalks or not, has to be on there. Can't, so.
Yeah, when is the next Paths Committee meeting? And,
October?
well,
There's 2 things that I would, I'm sorry, Neil, go ahead.
Just very, very broadly speaking, I'm very much in favor of incorporating sidewalks into development as these things happen. I hear argument and I'm very sensitive to that, and it resonates with me. And perhaps it's coming out of that economic development meeting the other night where, people are like, we need to be more, more responsive. So anyways, I see South Village on Spear Street, right? You go up and there's a bike path there in front of the South Village development, which I think is about 50 yards long, right? It starts, you're going north, it's on the right side of the road, on the right side of Spear Street, and it starts about 20 yards south of the traffic light. It goes through the traffic light and it stops about 20 foot on the other side of the traffic light. It says bike lane starts, and then it says bike lane stops, and it's the most ridiculous thing. As a biker, I drive by it and I think, this is great because it points to a future where there's going to be an actual bike lane on Spear Street. Yay, team. But in the interim, it's just ridiculous. And I hear your point, and perhaps there's another way. I mean, I like the idea of this fund that you're talking about to be able to fund other, where bike paths or sidewalks are more necessary. But perhaps in this kind of situation, a waiver for neighborhoods which are already developed, where you're doing a onesie twosie sorts of project is very appropriate. I mean, if we're doing a South Village type of project, yeah, we absolutely need to be having sidewalks here and this sort of thing. I do think that putting in a little sidewalk on a single piece of road will promote people to talk about and request more sidewalks down the road. I think that's a sort of a jump start to how that conversation happens. But I also look at this and really scratch my head about, is this the right place to have that fight?
And you can,
So thinking about a waiver in terms of, okay, this is one lot on a dead-end road with 20 other buildings that are fully developed, I don't, that seems
yeah,
like an
my
appropriate place
concern
to be.
though is that unless we put into the waivers that, yes, you can grant a waiver if it's on a dead-end road and all of the other neighbors say that we're never going to develop and it's very specific to that.
Not that
instance.
all the other neighbors that we're never going to develop, but just that the opportunity for redevelopment in that sort of situation is very low. I mean, it's very
Those
low.
arguments can be made in a lot of ways. That's why I like the idea when we were first discussing this of having a fund of some sort, that maybe that neighborhood never has sidewalk, or maybe at some future
Yeah, like
date,
I say, I like the idea of
neighbors
the
want
of the
to
fund.
lobby for that.
I'm concerned about the ability to implement that.
And it's those mechanics that
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not clear
It's
on.
very hard to do it. I mean, and we developed Point View Drive off of Bay Road. And again, that was an area that had 5 lots, relatively no reason to put a sidewalk up that 1,000 feet. But what I did was, I gave the town an easement across the street. So when you drive down Bay Road with a rail, just before the underpass, I actually own a thin strip of land along the side there. So I gave the town a 10-foot easement. So when they come from the underpass, they can get all the way up to that first house with a path or whatever. So it wasn't me just saying, hey, I think a sidewalk is stupid here. I think a sidewalk is a little bit better over here, and this is where I gave you the land or the
Right.
ability to do it. So, and I'm thinking, that's why I said, I don't have a problem giving some money to a fund. I'm not opposed to it, but,
It's gotta be there.
There's better locations for it. I mean, and the DRB was put in a hard spot, because there was a couple of neighbors that were concerned with the number of houses, the 3 as opposed to 2, but the bulk of the neighbors' concern was that we really don't want this sidewalk. So, that's what they were looking at, so.
Is there another place on that street that would make more sense, like at the beginning of the street, coming off of Route 7? Because I see the logic of a fund, that you as the developer would kick into a sidewalk fund, but I could also.
It's not a bad idea, Steve, because when people do walk up to the very edge, if the state, when they were doing the sidewalks, had turned them so that there was a start, so you're not walking up when somebody's turning in like that, that's not a bad, I don't know if those neighbors are gonna be crazy about having, a chunk of there, but that's not a
Well, it's
bad
not
idea.
theirs anyway, it's not their
It's the
yard.
town's technically, yeah, if you stay within the right of way, that isn't a bad idea, I don't think.
I could see doing
Yeah.
that as an exchange, just like you were saying that you did on Bay
It's
Road,
not-
with the
yeah.
trade for one to the other. Because putting it into a fund means that whoever's buying the houses that you're developing is paying for a sidewalk in Kate's neighborhood, or in my neighborhood, or Megan's neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's not, they're paying for it, but it's not benefiting them directly. I like the idea of, if you can
That's not
figure
a
out
bad
another
idea.
spot, I think that sounds like a good alternative that we can consider.
So you're saying essentially give the DRB the flexibility to come up with an alternative solution or location with the developer?
Yeah, in that same neighborhood, on the same street.
Which would apply in this situation, but might not apply in
That would be
numerous
very
other
difficult to
situations.
Include, because to work out something in the form-based zoning regulations where they can then take the money and apply it. I mean, the DRB wouldn't normally be the body that's making the decision about where the investment should be.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if there was some kind of fee structure, then it may be easier for everyone to agree that you get an application in, it's not a suitable location for the sidewalk. If the contribution is made to this fund, then you bypass the discussion, and whatever process there is to use the money in the fund just unfolds.
Yeah, it's probably gonna be easier that.
I think in terms of the concern of like your money going towards my neighborhood sidewalks, if you think about sort of overall safety of the community, if it's like a bike path on Spear Street or whatever, and that could be sort of the counter argument to that, that
And it's a fund that
It's-
I'm paying for, not the homeowners. You know, it's like the school, you know, fund that, you know, it's part of the fees that when you pull a building permit, you know, it's just another one that the developer has to pay. You know,
It's still,
not-
it's the.
Oh, yeah, no, I know.
It's-
No,
They
it's
don't
passed
see it
down.
as.
Yeah, yeah, I understand,
Yeah.
but.
they don't get the direct benefit.
Yeah. But if we make it something that, you know, everybody has to pay into, when it's just a cost of doing business here, I don't see how that, I mean, I think that could be something that we could consider.
Impact fees are
Yeah,
Tricky.
tricky,
Well-
because you have to have it, you have to have a specific, it's tricky.
yeah.
So I don't know how that, because
But,
we
you know,
tried to do that
but-
before and it's tricky.
Yeah, but if the goal is to improve walkability and bikeability, which people say they want, well, then how do you do that, you know? I mean, South Burlington has the penny for paths, you know, there's different techniques for it. But if we can at least all come together, again, using the language from that economic development forum, to discuss how we arrive at, you know, mechanisms for improving this goal that we say we want, you know, that, I mean, I think that'll
If you go back
help.
to the connection, Dean, to Bayfield, on that street, right there. That used to be a road. When the Bayfield development was all built up, they petitioned the select board to close it off. That was a guardrail across there, just a guardrail right across the pavement. My brother and I did that. So that's the walkability between those neighborhoods was done by my brother and I.
Yeah.
So that was
Very
just a guardrail across there. So we did things, you know, we grew up in that neighborhood, so that made it a lot more walkable. So, anyway.
And I also do want to reiterate, like, appreciate you bringing this up and continuing the conversation, because it's certainly not something where there's any intention to box anybody into, you got to do this and it's going to look stupid or anything like that. It's more about what can we do, because we do have form-based zoning. Do we just take this neighborhood out of it because we're not serious about it, but then that eliminates the density rules and the advantages to it?
But I think when the planning commission was first starting out with form-based code, they realized that changes would have to be made when it started to be implemented on the ground. And the regs started to be, you know, used. So I'm glad to see that there's at least an openness, because I think that was the planning commission's intent from the beginning, that, you know, these regs would have to be adjusted, you know, as projects came in and you saw what things worked and what things didn't. So-
In this amendment package that we've been working on the last several meetings now, we've had other developers come in and give us inputs, and that has led to additional changes that go in there. So that's absolutely part of the intent, is to work through this. It's not something that we're never going to change. I just foresaw it as, there's no doubt in my mind that if we grant a waiver to eliminate the sidewalk requirement or street trees or any of that, there will never be any, if there's any contention whatsoever, because it would just be the easiest path for the DRB to say, okay, waived. So yeah, how about we, through the PAS committee, and I'm happy to be involved however as well, maybe if it's even just having some informal conversations with select board members, just to get an idea of where people stand and how we might be able to architect something that could be useful.
Their next meeting, I believe, would be October 21st. I'm going to double.
Okay.
I won't be able to attend, but I can write something ahead of time.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you very much for letting me give the input.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Hope you don't dream about definitions.
No, it's the town plan, I can't get it out of my head.
You too? All right. So we'll do So we'll do stormwater at the next meeting. Given where we are on time, can the comprehensive plan map?
Yeah, it's all stuff that can wait.
Yeah. I feel like we put that off for about 2.5 months now. Okay.
No, we got through this, though. Let's,
We did, yeah. Except for one definition. We're going to get there.
we're gonna nail it.
Okay, so next time, sewer, the map discussion, Beaver Creek Lane included. So, future meeting topics? Does that just cover it?
Yeah, I mean, there were some things that were mentioned in the memo, and that's over there.
Yeah.
I was just trying to. But. What did I say? Yeah, did you want to, well, something about stormwater, if, I just wanted to mention again that Tom DiPietro from South Burlington had indicated that he would be willing to come to a meeting if the commission wanted to get some input from someone like that before it made any decisions on what it would warn. That's just out there. If it's not, and maybe it is the best to deal with it this way, that it's a bigger task that he's brought in for.
You mean affecting the form base?
Yeah, potentially.
As well?
I mean, we haven't discussed tonight this idea of bringing the form-based zoning requirements into the mixed-use district by that amendment to Section 5. That's the thing that Stephen was referring to. That's a pretty weighty question and brings up some of these issues having to do with, well, developers will incur a cost that they're not incurring unless they choose to use form-based zoning. And is it going to be where that goes? And the group kind of already reached a resolution preliminarily. But in terms of other zoning topics, a meeting potentially of this group would go towards hosting the Natural Resources Committee for the joint retreat, unless you do it on another night. And so it would be in addition to your regular meeting. There are the other zoning changes. The one that I think is probably the best one for me to argue, let's really try to get this included, is the tweaking of the requirements having to do with the Historic Preservation and Design Review District. And the change would make it simpler for people doing projects like fences and things like that have to go to the HPDRC and then have to go to the DRB before Revy can sign a permit. And there's some amendments that we've worked up that the HPDRC supports that could simplify that process for projects that don't already have to go to the DRB for something else. So that's one that I would make a plug for as a future zoning change. Anyway, it's getting late. And I don't know if you want to do a recap of the select board meeting, so.
The
Meeting on Tuesday.
right, Tuesdays. No, I was just trying to think of a couple of questions. I don't recall in the doodle poll. Last time I looked, there were about 3 people that had responded. I didn't know if we
It's jumped up. I
had it.
I responded today.
Yeah. All right.
I sent the,
No, that's good. Yeah, mostly just a plug to say, yeah, take a look at that and let's see when that makes the most sense. Because in the past, we've done it not as a planning commission meeting time. It's just been a superfluous meeting. We also, in the planning commission, traditionally in November, either have one meeting or move the second meeting, so we have back-to-back weeks depending on workload. So that's, as October is next week for some reason. That means November is the week after that, I think. So that may be something we want to start thinking about. I would, it doesn't help with time, but I would be interested in having the natural resources joint retreat separate, because we've had a couple of meetings that we've delayed ourselves, and I'd really like to get form-based zoning out of the way. Stormwater, that discussion would impact more the current regulations than form-based, so unless I'm missing something, it may result in wanting to come back to it.
Right, right. It could, the changes to the mixed-use district regulations can happen later. It doesn't have to happen as part of this.
Right. So I think, just to make sure we've got at least a loose consensus, I would be in favor of trying to wrap up form-based zoning next time with the definition and be able to warn a hearing for the next meeting that we have. Then, and potentially in that meeting, if we don't spend 2 hours on a definition, we could also add in the maps and historic design review.
Yeah.
And then stormwater, potentially at a meeting after that, we could have Tom come in and really get into that topic. And then who knows what happens with sidewalks, and as we fit that in as we need to.
Are we still going to do sort of the big picture overview of form-based zoning that we had talked about originally?
Yeah, well, we're going to need to get in there. We've got a long parking lot.
things.
Yeah.
and-
Okay. I would just not push it too far back while this is fresh in our minds. 'Cause
True.
it's a lot of information. So there are definitely other things that have been waiting, I think that should go, but just as a plug for someone who's still learning all of this, well, this is new, it would be helpful to follow.
And
on.
it'll be good because we will, yeah, and we have, I don't anticipate issues with the select board, but we'll have another member joining us soon after the select board. Yes, this is Steve.
That's cool, you know, I think. Fun group of people.
You gotta use the glasses.
And this is why he'll fit right in. So yeah, so as far as candidates, we have Steve and another gentleman, Gene, whose last name I'm...
Sirois? Sirois?
Yes, who, we're meeting with him on, well, tomorrow, right? Yeah. So then at the select board's next meeting, they'll potentially have the two names, and then if they approve that, then the next meeting will be back to full force, which is awesome.
Excellent.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah.
Because I'm just noticing, I'm going to actually be missing both meetings in October, unfortunately.
Oh.
Timing of some stuff. So,
I had one thing I wanted to add to our future parking lot of things. And that stems out of that economic forum on Tuesday that some of us were at. And it struck me that, some people were down on zoning there. But one thing was Matt
They want
Cohen.
common sense zoning. That's the thing.
Yeah, I know, which, yeah, we should have asked what that meant. But at the same time, they did have some points where, Matt Cohen in particular, of Fiddlehead, where he's saying that he's abandoned plans to do a restaurant up there because the DRB didn't, or because there were people that were fighting it, I guess, and appealing it, or threatening to appeal it, whatever. I'm not really sure the whole story. But I don't believe he's ever come in to the planning commission to ask for a zoning change, but it might make sense for us to discuss whether we would want to make a zoning change up in that area proactively to try to keep businesses like his in Shelburne rather than, I mean, he's already got plans to do a restaurant out in Williston, I guess, is what I'm hearing.
That was the reading between the lines, yeah.
Yeah.
And
but I've
I
heard
didn't know until that
specifically
time that was where that was going. And I think it sounds to me, based on the frustration, that it was based on the appeals, and he just said, screw it, not going to do it. And on that note, today I drafted I don't know how this manifests, but I drafted what could be an op-ed or letter to the editor or whatever to go into the Shelburne News to kind of thanks for the Economic Development Forum and just reiterating that, hey, regulations are regulations. They're not permanent forever. I understand that there is this perception, but there have been examples of businesses and individuals that have come in and worked with us, and we've had discussions and we've made changes. Can't ever make promises, but that's basically step one from a commission perspective. And for the mechanics of that, I was debating, this was earlier today, and I was debating just BCCing everybody and getting inputs on if there's anything that should be added or anybody feels strongly about one way or the other, because I'd like to know that there's some general idea of general broad support. So I may do that. I think the deadline, though, to get an article in or anything in is the Monday before it comes out?
Usually.
Yeah.
Okay, sometimes maybe we'll hold space till Tuesday, but for something longer, maybe Monday.
Yeah, and I was,
I think that's a really great idea. It just shows, unity of purpose and and that we're all committed to,
well,
this is an
then
important issue.
what I'll do tonight, I'll send it out and BCC everybody and just get me your feedback sometime before Monday. It really is just a first draft. It's not polished or anything, so just keep that in mind.
So that's going into the op-ed of the
Well, that was
paper.
my idea behind it, was just it's too long for a front porch forum thing, so it's just, put something in the paper and it brings awareness, maybe generates a discussion. And I would certainly include you in that as well, Dean, just.
Well, and
looking for
that'll
any kind of
work too,
feedback.
because there will be coverage of the summit, presumably, in the next Shelburne News. So if you can get it in,
Oh, right, yeah, the
Yeah.
reporter was right behind me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Need some coverage for that.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure that the zoning issue will be mentioned in that article.
yeah.
Well, and it would, and it kind of,
Given how much it was talked about.
and I understand that this one is a bit more complicated because there's business owners in a park and there's an owner of the park and those various relationships. But the ultimate thing that I want the community to understand is that if there are issues, just at least come and speak a piece, kind of thing. Like let the commission know what it is, make sure that there's something on the record, and then we either can deal with it or we can't. But
Yeah.
that's,
And I think that's an important step. I think, too, that, something that, I know that sort of coming out of the adopting the town plan, we have on this laundry list of next steps, updating the zoning regulations. I would suggest that it would be in our best interest, in the community's best interest, to go and have some conversation, a meeting in each of these different zoning districts. I mean, actually, in the zoning district. Like when we talk about the downtown district here, let's go over to the supermarket, and after they close one night, actually have a meeting in the supermarket and invite other businesses there to come together, or at the restaurant is there. Actually have a meeting there with the people that run businesses there. Go down to the Billowhead and have a meeting down there at one of those places and invite all those businesses together so we can all look around and see what they're talking about and really make people feel like they're included as part of that process.
totally support that. I think the mechanism for that is probably through the business association, which I know I've been to a couple of those, and at one of them, Ravi and I presented some things that were going on. And I spoke with Roz a little bit last weekend. I ran into her. She is or was the leader of the...
She was pretty heavily involved, but she's not as,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And basically the challenge is around, there are, 600 businesses in Shelburne on paper or something like that.
Yeah, so how do we meet with all of those businesses? We can't, it's impossible.
No, but it would be to encourage going to forums like that, and maybe through Small Business Association, we say, hey, there's going to be one or many planning commissioners there, and to address concerns or talk about mechanics or whatever it is. I think that would be a good venue, because it's going to get really hard to get people to show up to go meet lots of businesses.
My suggestion is actually having planning commission meetings as we're considering updating the zoning regulations. When we talk about each zone
go to
on
those.
an individual, actually go there. Instead of
Right.
doing it here in this room, go there. Find an open space in that zone and publish it and say, we're going to be here tonight to hear your concerns because we want to hear you. We're really proactive. say, we want to hear your opinion on this. It's important to us.
Yeah.
It's important to Shelburne. We want to make sure that you have the ability to grow and change. This is your opportunity, and put it out there.
That might be, logistics might be kind of tough.
It would
How do
be,
you
but I
get
think
the
that's a
camera
good thing
set
to
up
keep in
and all
mind.
that
Yeah.
AV stuff happening at Fiddlehead. or
Live
wherever.
stream and
And, I mean, they did it over here Tuesday night. They brought the camera over.
No, well, that's
They
true.
they have a setup there.
Huh?
Don't
Well,
they have a
it's-
setup in that room?
I don't think it's
But
permanent.
can I get back to the Artisan Village thing? I mean,
Yeah.
we don't always have to be retroactive or reactive when somebody comes in with something that says, I want to take out a sidewalk or whatever. Can you change the zoning? But we can also be proactive where we see a need. And so my question is, does everybody want to take up the idea of adjusting the zoning to allow a restaurant without having it be a fight through the DRV? or the
Absolutely.
No,
DRV?
I'm totally open to it.
Absolutely.
I was out of town, so I don't know what the zoning concern was, but
It's bad.
generally, I would say yes.
Well, but you're still
Like-
going to have, I mean, so then we need to wrap up, but where that's going to go is the decisions that were back and forth that were being objected to by neighbors.
Mhm.
That's just going to, that conversation will then translate to here.
That's right.
So it'll be the
Yeah.
same thing, and we'll be, stonewalled and people will object just in this forum, which is fine, and that's how things need to work. So yeah, completely open to it.
Okay,
Maybe that's a future agenda topic.
that's what I was
Yeah.
I mean,
bringing
for
up.
sure. No, I agree with that. I mean, there are other, we've had people come in and talk about the sign issues and where the signs face Route 7 or not. And we've had two different people come in and talk about that, and then we heard Matt sort of address that stuff. I mean, none of those folks at the meeting the other night were specific in any sense of the way, which is zoning is a boogeyman. This is something that we can just put out there and beat up because we sort of feel like, well, yeah, everybody's going to agree with that. I'm not going to agree that zoning's a king, you know what I mean? There is no specificity around it whatsoever, but that's ultimately our job, is to go out there and sort of pull that out of people, which is sort of where my
Well, the thing I
Comments come from.
took away from that is the criticism was more about the lack of predictability, perceived lack of predictability about our zoning and zoning outcomes. And that's something that I think we could address. I mean, yes, absolutely, you're going to have rules. The rules are, we're not going to not have rules.
Right.
But, we can make the rules more fluid, more flexible, more better able to anticipate different things. So, that's a zoning area that has been, kind of given sort of a lick and a promise in terms of zoning attention for a long time, because we've been focused on Route 7 North and just for other reasons. So it's probably due for kind of an overhaul. And I think what happened with the Fiddlehead is, kind of an indicator that we've got a big problem there. So,
But that was, there are rules there, and that wasn't allowed by the rules.
Right.
And that was the predicament that the DRB was in.
That's right, yeah. So it's, in that case, it wasn't a question of, here's a rule and we're going to do what the rule says. And then them being stymied by that. They weren't allowed to do that by the rules. And so it's just a matter of us changing the rule or.
But they got an approval, Steve.
Yeah,
Yeah,
did.
they
But
got an
then-
approval
but-
and then it got appealed.
And then it got
So then it's in
appealed.
the legal system. And again, if there was
but that's part of the predictability thing, is us knowing what it is that they want. So, I mean, how can we create rules that,
but on a proactive tip, if we as a planning commission said, hey, that Southern Gateway area, it'd be, why don't we have that opened up for a restaurant? And let's have that discussion. And then no doubt we would have many people from those neighborhoods come in and have thoughts on it. But
Right.
that's where the discourse goes.
Right,
And we see
yeah.
what happens.
yeah.
So about 5 years ago, the regs were changed to specifically prohibit restaurants in that area. And at the time,
there were people that had good reasons for that. Around the same time.
Not me, I'd be on record, not me. I was always been like, what is the problem with having a
But let me
restaurant
just
here?
finish, because
But-
I don't want us to stay
Yeah.
later. And similarly, the regs were changed to
planning commission
specifically
that
put
long.
restrictions on the signage that people are now clamoring about. So, people need to keep in mind that zoning is one of those things, it's kind of like, whichever army's controlling the field. One army moves off the field, another moves on, then that army's going to want different things. So don't lambaste yourselves about what was popular 5 years ago, because people's feelings will change. But, it also helps when the property owners and business owners are engaged. And as I have said to Jason, there's a list of businesses as long as my arm who came and who said, okay, I understand there's a problem with the zoning. I can't do what I want. Can we fix it? And that's been done. I was talking with somebody, it was done when Wake Robin was created, but in the time I've been here, it's been done for the renovation of the Shelburne Inn. It's been done for Marco's Pizzeria. It's been done for Shelburne Shipyard. It's been done for a bunch for Jamie 2 codes. I mean, the number of times the zoning was changed in response to specific businesses is really long, and that opportunity isn't always taken. And sometimes businesses or property owners say that they think they can do something that the regs don't allow them to do. And if they don't agree that the regs need to be changed, it's a kind of tough position to be in.
Right. Yeah, to me, it's just to facilitate, hey, community, let's talk. Like, I would like the businesses to know there is a mechanism, beginning of every meeting, come in and present, let us know what your challenges. So the mechanism is there, but I also understand people are busy, and it's an easy thing to say, I don't want to deal with the town, it's going to take forever.
But I think it's a good step to put an op-ed in, just to say we're open for business.
Well, and I also think it'd be good to have a broad spectrum of businesses coming in, so we don't get in the position of we're changing it just for one business. That if we can encourage more people to come in, then we're not.
Squeaky wheel gets the oil in.
Yeah, because you change for one and you don't know the impact on all the others. So if we can hear from a bunch of people, then we can make sort of a more holistic decision.
Which is what happened with the whole form-based zoning process, where there was lots of stuff. Good discussion, though. If we're okay with that, I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Yes.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Moved by Kate, seconded by Neil. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you.
It was